is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land and continue to do so today. We're grateful to have the opportunity to work and to meet on this land. We know that Indigenous women in Canada are almost 3 times more likely to experience financial abuse in their lifetimes. And as well that Indigenous people in Canada experience greater exclusion from financial services. In Ontario, for example, only 5 out of the 123 First Nations reserves in the province have access to mainstream financial institutions. And 15% of low-income Indigenous peoples are unbanked, which is at least twice that of non-Indigenous low-income peoples in Canada. So we start our events with a land acknowledgement as at least a step towards recognition of our ongoing responsibility to the original stewards of this land and to the work of reconciliation. My name, and I should have started off the bat with this, is Molly Willits. I work with the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment to help coordinate their financial services task force on economic abuse. We also have a policy committee. And if you, after today, want to learn more about either of these committees or get involved in the task force, please do reach out. And yeah, I want to particularly thank those of you who are joining us from Australia, where it's about 2 a.m. currently. So thank you very much for being with us today. We're incredibly excited for today's event, which is marking the midway point through our both Financial Literacy Month here in Canada, as well as our Help Us Rise campaign, which is a month-long campaign to take meaningful action to combat economic abuse. We will be joined shortly by Meseret Haliesis, who's the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, who can tell you a bit more about the Help Us Rise campaign and the work of CCFWE more broadly. A few quick housekeeping rules before we begin, or housekeeping notes to make sure that this event is as productive as possible for everyone. So welcome. You can use, as I said, the Q&A function to ask questions during the panels and breakout sessions, the chat function to sort of generally introduce yourself or share resources or general sort of discussion throughout. You can ask questions in both English and French as well. The session will be recorded. And we'll be using the chat function throughout to share important resources, links of interest that come up through the discussions as well. If you have any concerns or need assistance, please reach out to myself, Michaela, or Narita, or put them in the chat, and we will try and address them as quickly as possible. And we also encourage you to tweet throughout the day. So at CCFWE on Twitter or X, and the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment on LinkedIn. And there's a couple of hashtags up on the screen there that we encourage you to use as well. So quickly to go through the agenda for today. So we're going to start off with some opening remarks. Oh, and I'll also quickly draw your attention to, you'll notice another screen that's visible to you, the blank screen that says "In Conversation" at the top. We're very excited to have a graphic recorder with us today who's going to be taking the conversations that happen throughout the day and turning them into a graphic image, recording and interpreting and linking all of the conversations that come out throughout the day together. And then we'll have a few images at the end of the conference that we'll be able to share with you that serve as a record and a sort of interpretation of the conversations that come up. So that's really exciting. So we have a really great set of discussions and learning opportunities planned for you today. Our objective is to learn from and with each other about where the banking and financial services sector is falling short when it comes to the needs of survivors of economic abuse, What are the challenges the sector experiences in bridging those service gaps, and how we can work together across sectors to ensure victims and survivors are receiving the support, products, and services they need to help them leave, stay out of, and recover from abusive relationships. With that said, let's go over the agenda. So we'll have some opening remarks, as I said, from our Executive Director, Meseret Haliasis. We'll head into an opening conversation with representatives from 3 advocacy organizations working in the UK, Australia, and Canada. We'll then have breakout sessions, which I'll touch on in a second. We'll come back as a group and spend some time together synthesizing and reflecting on those breakout sessions. And at that point, after those breakout sessions, there will be a break. Because we do know that 3.5 hours of content can be a lot. We'll close, and then we'll come back after that break and close off with a panel focused on the Canadian ecosystem, where we'll hear from representatives from one of our major banks, the regulatory body responsible for consumer protection federally here in Canada, and a community organization doing direct service financial empowerment work with financially vulnerable communities. Before we head into our opening remarks, I just want to highlight the breakout sessions, as we did send out a sign-up sheet ahead of the event, but I know not everyone had a chance to respond to that. So please take a moment to sort of, and I'll share these again when the breakout sessions are going to start, but just to consider the 3 options that are available. Think about which you would be most interested in joining when the breakout sessions do start, and then you will have the opportunity to just sort of assign yourself to the room, to the breakout session that you're most interested in joining. So without further ado, I'm very excited to bring up our first opening remarks speaker. And if you, sorry, give me 1 second. Michaela, can you bring Messi up onto the stage for us? Hi, Messi. How are you?
Hi, sorry.
Wonderful.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I'll hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I had a take glitch this morning. A big apology if I'm late. Okay. Welcome to the Financial Future Summit, launched in honor of Help Us Rise 2023, which is the Canadian Centre for Women Empowerment's National Economic Abuse Awareness Campaign currently underway. In my role as Executive Director, I address you today not only my capacity as a leader, but also as an advocate for future where financial empowerment and equity is inseparable from human dignity. Today, we'll welcome you together to share invaluable insights, bringing representatives from financial institutions, frontline services, regulatory agencies together to explore and share best practices across 3 continents, which is United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. This summit marks a collaborative effort to enhance our collective understanding and pave the way for a more secure and equitable financial future. Today, we have honor to have exceptional lineup, wonderful panelists and speakers like Dr. Nicola, Rebecca, Catherine, Gilberto, Jessica, Maria, Mile, and Lauren, who embodies the spirit of innovation, leadership, technology, corporate responsibility, and vision of financial inclusion. I would like to welcome a wide variety of our participants present here today, and the distinguished member of the Canadian government, Financial Consumer Agency Canada, Women's Service Organization, members from financial institution, Women's Service Organization, and also women who have lived experience in academia. I would like to welcome our more online participants joining us across Canada, United Kingdom, and Australia. Thank you for joining us despite the time zone difference in various continents. I understand that those in UK and Australia, the time aligned with late night hour, and we really appreciate. This pivotal summit will not allow only to discuss the difficulty of financial landscape, but also the crucial issue that extend beyond the daily finance, risk, value, and profit margin, which is a pressing matter, economic abuse and gender-based violence. By acknowledging the significant impact of this issue, our organization places a high priority on economic abuse. Our organization is committed to supporting victims, service providers through development of educational resources, tools, financial workshops, generating grassroots evidence and data, advocating for removal of systemic change, and incorporated lived experience as the core of our day-to-day work. We believe financial industry is a powerful force in influencing women economy and shaping our society well. Economic abuse is not a remote issue confined to the domain of social work and social justice. It's a matter of converging in the realm of finance. The Canadian Centre for Women Empowerment believes financial inclusion is a cornerstone of economic development, a driving force behind poverty alleviation, and a catalyst for sustainable financial growth. Targeting vulnerable sector enhance financial inclusion. Supporting vulnerable sector aligned with the principle of corporate social responsibilities, reduce business risk, but also open up a new market revenue stream and contributing a long-term sustainability. We have observed that some of amazing Canadian banks, such as Scotiabank, have implemented a remarkable program to address the need of coerced debt for victims, particularly in the context of financial abuse among seniors and victims of human trafficking. This initiative involves the development of innovative financial products and services tailored to this vulnerable group. Your commitment is regarded truly commendable and serves as a beacon of hope for supporting survivors of victims and gender-based violence. I hope that expanded similar with others group of community like victims of economic abuse. This substantial effort is not only significant for advocates, but also for victims of gender-based violence. It's set a precedent for the establishment of tailored program, similar for those in other countries, and fostering a bright future for those who have affected. So the willingness to protect women from financial crime, the willingness to provide them a bright future, ensuring that they are safe and secure financial service, this is what we bring us together today. We must recognize the influence of financial institutions and leveraging to drive a positive societal change. We believe that the banking sector, as a key player for global economy, has the ability to catalyze for change. By addressing economic abuse within banking sector, we aim to create an environment that fosters inclusivity, equality, and safety. We extend our sincere gratitude, our partners and sisters organization with Dr. Nicola Sharps, the CEO of Surviving Economic Abuse in United Kingdom, and Rebecca Glenn, the founder and the CEO of the Centre for Women Economic Safety in Australia. Their valuable expertise and shared lessons over the past few years have greatly contributed in our understanding and adoption best practices. The collaboration and the insight gleaned from this experience have been instrumental in shaping our approach and fostering collective commitment combating economic abuse in Canada. Through this summit, let's engage in conversations that challenge norms, ignite change, and propel up towards the future where banking sector is not only financial power, but also a champion for social justice. Thank you all by choosing to open up your laptop today to join this very important event. You have chosen to open your mind to participate in the prevention of economic abuse. I trust that you will continue this conversation within among your community in order to amplify the voice of survivors of economic abuse. As we honor the impactful this discussion and conversation and shared commitment at this summit, I invite you all to join us in translating our collective efforts to relay award action. Add your name to our petition directed to the federal government as we are requesting the House of Commons to recognize November 26 as a National Day of Economic Abuse. Over the past 4 years, we have dedicated our service to advocate for recognition of November 26 as Economic Abuse Awareness Day in over 100 cities, 10 provinces, and 3 territories. We were so grateful for the support of provincial leaders and mayors across Canada. Now this year, we are asking House of Commons to be part of this declaration. The process, it takes just 30 seconds, and your signature holds the power to drive meaningful change. You'll find the link to the petition in the chat. Please go ahead and enter your name. Right, you'll get a confirmation email. To our esteemed funder, the Canadian government, particularly Women and Gender Equality Canada WAGE, thank you so much for your commitment, and thank you so much for all the financial support. Without your support, we will not be here today. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude to our task force members, for the Banking, Finance, and the Policy Both Committee for their tireless dedication and collaboration effort in our mission to eradicate economic abuse in Canada. We look forward to continue working together to enhance financial services and program for victims. Finally, I thank you, my amazing team, Molly, Michaela, Nerida, Nia, Patrick, Dr. Andrea, Dr. Snow, Dana, and all communication team behind this event. Johanna, Justin, I don't have any word to thank everyone, including my volunteers. Thank you so much for your unwavering commitment to end economic abuse in Canada. May this summit be a catalyst for collaboration, knowledge sharing, innovation, and advocacy that resonate far beyond the summit. May our discussion also today inspire collaboration from coast to coast in Canada and across the world, and share commitment in shaping future where better day-to-day banking service as a catalyst for positive social change. Thank you so much for being part of this Financial Future Summit, and enjoy the summit. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Messi. And I'm going to bring up now Michaela Meyer, who is the Director of Policy at the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, who will introduce our next panel. Michaela.
Thank you so much, Molly. Thank you for your words. Thank you, Messi, for your kind words as well. So thanks so much, everyone, as well, for joining us here today, this morning, afternoon, very early morning, depending where you're at right now. As Molly mentioned, I'm Michaela Meyer. I'm Director of Policy here at CCFWE. I go by the pronouns she, her, and I am also calling in from the unceded and traditional territories of many different nations, amongst them the Haudenosaunee and Mohawk nations, also known as Montreal, Quebec in Canada. So I have the honor to moderate the first panel discussion here today at the summit. Our first panel, which is titled Understanding Economic Abuse in Canada, the UK and Australia, should provide some context for the conversations on how economic abuse is currently addressed in regards to the financial sector. So we'll hear from the advocacy work of three organizations in 3 countries and continents, and their efforts to address financial barriers that economic abuse survivors are facing. I'm very honored to introduce 3 incredible women for this conversation that I also have the honor and pleasure to work with and learn from throughout my work. So firstly, I will start with Rebecca Glenn, founder and CEO of the Center for Women's Economic Safety. So Rebecca founded CWES to raise awareness of economic abuse as a form of domestic and family violence, and to advocate for structural and systemic change to support women's economic safety. From 2018 to 21, Rebecca has also worked at Insight Exchange, a domestic violence initiative focusing on resistance and responses to violence and abuse. And before this, Rebecca Glenn worked for Australia's largest bank, Commonwealth Bank, developing its employee financial well-being program. So as a member of the bank's domestic and family violence working group, she worked with a range of experts to develop the Women's Financial Wellbeing Guide, and partnered with Domestic Violence New South Wales to produce the Addressing Financial Abuse Guide. And she also led the development of the bank's first financial inclusion action plan. Rebecca was also the campaign director for Money Smart Week, and then was appointed CEO for the nonprofit organization Financial Literacy Australia in 2013. In 2019, she was awarded Churchill Fellowship to investigate service responses to women experiencing or escaping domestic economic abuse in the UK, US, and Canada. So thank you so much for being with us today, Rebecca. We're really honored, and especially joining in at 2 a.m. So thanks so much for joining. The second speaker we have is Dr. Nicola Sharp, founder and CEO of Surviving Economic Abuse in the UK. So SEA is the only UK charity in the UK dedicated to raising awareness of economic abuse and transforming responses to it. So Nicola is a renowned expert in economic abuse and has worked in the violence against women and girls sector since 2006 in both policy influencing and research roles. So she has published several articles and even a book on economic abuse. Nicola is also an Emeritus Research Fellow in the Child and Women Abuse Studies Unit at the London Metropolitan University. And in 2020, Nicola was awarded an OBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours for services to victims of domestic and economic abuse in recognition of her work. She was the 2020 winner of the Third Sector Award for Rising Chief Executive and also named Rising Leader of the Year in 2021 by the Charity Times Award. Really also honored to have you join here today, Nicola. And finally, Meseret, or Messi, as she's known to many of us, Heliyesus, founder and executive director at the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment. So Messi is a multi-award-winning thought leader and change maker with distinguished record in championing economic justice and health equity. And for the past 22 years, she has dedicated her life in advancing progressive policies on access to reproductive health, women's and children's health, global health research, financial empowerment, racial justice, and women's economic rights. She founded the Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment, an effort to address economic disparities and dismantle systemic barriers that hinder women's economic advancement. Her primary mission is to shape public policy and legislative decisions that empower victims of economic abuse to achieve economic independence in Canada. So Meseret is dedicated to bridging gaps in existing approaches to combat economic abuse. She's also the founder of Maternity Today, an organization dedicated to sharing evidence, resources, and advocacy tools with healthcare workers. She serves as a board of directors at the Centretown Community Health Centre and the NFGM Canada Network. In addition to that, Meseret is also an Ashoka Fellow and a subject matter expert to various World Health Organization task forces. She's a policy advisor of the Network for Advancement of Black Communities and the government's committee for the City of Ottawa's Community Safety Wellbeing Plan that addresses poverty, systemic racism, gender-based violence, and mental health challenges that youth and women face in Canada. What an incredible panel we have here today. I'm really excited to have all of you join here today. Okay, I think everybody can see the panelists. Okay, thank you. We're good, great. Yes, so without further ado then, let's jump into the questions. So we will have 2 rounds of questions and would ask each of you to keep your answers to around 5 minutes each. So we still have time for a few minutes of Q&A in the end. So for all the participants, if you have any questions to the panelists, please add them to the Q&A box at the bottom and make sure also to mention to whom you would like to address the question so we can add them after. So for my first question, I would like to hear from you about your organization's work on addressing economic abuse regarding the financial sector. So I would start with you, Rebecca. The Center for Women's Economic Safety offers so-called money clinics for women and gender diverse people who are concerned about their finances resulting from abusive relationships. So could you maybe tell us a little bit more about those money clinics and how their advisors are maybe better equipped to assist economic abuse survivors than regular financial advisors or financial services?
Yeah, sure. So, and in fact, it's interesting to be talking about them in this forum because I guess the inspiration for our money clinics really came from the Churchill Fellowship that you mentioned. And of course, that is how I met Nick and Messi. So it's great to be back with you today. And I'm also joining you from unceded Aboriginal land at the other side of the world, but joining you from the lands of the Darug and Gundungurra people today. So money clinics are a free and confidential service that provides independent financial safety planning and information and support for people experiencing economic abuse. We often don't talk about it in terms of being a service for economic abuse because what we found is so many women are either uncertain about whether what they've been experiencing constitutes abuse, but they certainly know they have money concerns. So sometimes we'll talk about it as a service for people who have concerns about money in their relationship. And indeed, what is interesting, in fact, is that some of the referrals that we get particularly from domestic violence services will be, we've got this client who's just having some money trouble. Maybe you can help her with some budgeting. I like to share this because initially I'd say, we don't do budgeting, we assist people with economic abuse. And but of course, what actually presents in the first instance is, people, for all sorts of really good reasons, don't necessarily put everything on the table straight off the bat. And so what is often sitting behind that concern about money, or, maybe I need to look at my budgeting, is actually over a period of time, a pattern of behavior which has really restricted, controlled, exploited, sabotaged their financial situation. So our money clinics are run by qualified financial counsellors. So in Australia, financial counsellors have to be free and independent, as opposed to, say, a financial advisor or financial planner, which is, usually either there's a cost or a commission associated. And I guess the skill set that we've developed around for the money clinics is being much more knowledgeable about economic abuse, doing significantly more training in domestic and family violence, understanding coercive control, and also being trauma informed in the way we practice. Compared to other financial counsellors, there are processes that are different. So we know that there are many barriers to people who are seeking support. There are intake processes, there is eligibility criteria, things that are just more work for survivors. And so we've worked really hard to design a service that has no eligibility criteria. There's no means test, there's no income test, there's no geographic criteria, there's no residency status requirements. You don't even have to use your real name if you're that concerned about your digital footprint. You can give a pseudonym for your first appointment. So look, we're evidence informed in that we've seen the earlier you can intervene and support survivors around legal and financial issues, you see significantly improved financial outcomes. And that is sort of being borne out in our evaluation of the money clinics. And also it really helps to restore confidence. So we're really encouraged by the data that we're seeing from the way that we're running money clinics, and we're about to start expanding. So I think I've probably used up my 5 minutes and I'll stop talking.
Thank you so much. That was really interesting. And I think, yeah, it shows what a big difference then it also can make if for the experience, also for the survivors, right? Like if handling their finances, if somebody is trauma informed and understands their experiences they're facing. And also maybe, that a lot of survivors maybe don't even realize what they're experiencing is abuse, right? Because there is so many cultural norms part of it as well. So thank you so much. That's really interesting to hear more about the clinics. I will turn it now to you, Nicola. So surviving economic abuse brings change within the financial sector through its work with regulators, banking industry bodies, and also financial service firms. This also includes some collaboration with UK Finances, UK's collective voice for the banking and financial industry. So through that collaboration, financial institutions and firms can now respond to victim survivors through the established UK Finances 2021 Financial Abuse Code and new consumer duty. So I would be really interested, Nicola, to hear a bit more about this collaboration with UK Finances and the difference that this made for victim survivors.
Thanks, Michaela, and good morning, afternoon and evening, everybody, wherever in the world you're joining us from. Thank you for joining and sharing and learning from each other. And thank you so much to CCFWE, Messi, your team. Have just been fantastic putting this together, and we're really excited to be part of it and to contribute. So I suppose I just want to start with saying, why do we collaborate with the banking industry around economic abuse? And certainly here in the UK, we do so because after friends and family, actually victims and survivors are more likely to disclose economic abuse to their bank than they are the police or a domestic abuse service. So we recognise the unparalleled reach that they have in terms of their customer relationships. And I know today is about improving, but I just also want to celebrate the banking industry in the UK, because certainly 6 years ago, they were doing very little in this space. And sometimes I have to pinch myself in terms of what they are doing now. So just as a little bit of a, what's the word I'm searching for, just to encourage you to join Lauren and Naomi from the Surviving Economic Abuse team in the breakout sessions, because they can talk more about that and in more detail as well. So that was my ad. So in terms of how we've worked with the industry, we've taken very much a two-pronged approach. So certainly locating ourselves within the financial services industry and really learning and understanding their world. And we've found that we've been able to push economic abuse through the vulnerable customer agenda. So in February 2021, our regulator, which is called the Financial Conduct Authority, issued guidance for firms on the fair treatment of vulnerable customers. And we worked with them to influence understanding what drives vulnerability, and 4 drivers were identified. One of those was life events. Sitting within life events was domestic abuse, and we influenced that guidance to recognise economic control within domestic abuse. And what was really exciting about that guidance, which went out to all firms across the industry, was that it gave examples of good practice. So the first example is the UK Financial Abuse Code, which you mentioned, first developed in 2018, but updated in 2021. And that introduces a number of pillars and principles which seeks to bring increased awareness and better understanding of what financial abuse looks like, not only for firms and colleagues, but potential victims and their families. And really that's about ensuring consistency of support available to all accessing financial services across the UK. And then the second part of our work is around the domestic abuse sector specifically. And again, in 2021, we saw royal assent of a new act, which is the Domestic Abuse Act. And that names and defines economic abuse for the first time in legislation. So that sort of helps create profile around this issue. But certainly the statutory guidance, which underpins the Domestic Abuse Act, actually for the first time recognises financial services firms as stakeholders within what we call the coordinated community response to domestic abuse. So it recognises the vital role that I hope I've already kind of outlined they have to play. And I suppose just the other kind of good practice example within that Financial Conduct Authority guidance that I just wanted to speak to is the development of a specialist domestic and financial abuse team at Lloyds Banking Group. So the Lloyds Banking Group is the largest in the UK. More UK people have a product with Lloyds Banking Group. And so through our partnership with them, supporting them to develop that team and seconding a member of our team at Surviving Economic Abuse to that specialist, in short, DAFA team. It has been amazing to see how they have developed a response over time, which means that decisions can sometimes be taken outside of policy, and a real sort of understanding of economic abuse informs everything that they do. And I know Jane Roderick, who leads that, will be part of the breakout room with Lauren a little bit later on. And then finally, just to say that I guess what we've been doing up until now in many ways has been responding to the harm that is caused by abusers through supporting customers in partnership with the financial services sector. So our sort of challenge and what we're excited about moving forward is actually finding ways to prevent it from happening in the first place. And there's lots of overlap here with Beck's work and Catherine's work through the Design to Disrupt series in Australia. But we have something called the Consumer Duty, which was introduced again this year by the Financial Conduct Authority. And the purpose of that duty is to ensure that financial services firms deliver good outcomes for customers, but also they avoid foreseeable harms. So that gives us an opportunity to think about the design of products, the delivery of service, and how we can ensure that foreseeable harm to victims and survivors is stopped and closed down. So that makes a huge difference to victims and survivors. You'll be hearing from TSB, for example, about how they provide a flea fund for victims and survivors. So they help them move on from abusive situations and away from abusers. And you'll also be hearing in the breakout room from Starling, who have used technology for good to create a way of hiding abusive references, which are made with payments as well. So as I said, a celebration and exciting times ahead in the financial services sector in the UK.
Wow, that's amazing. So from when you said that, like, there was not that much going a few years ago, like, well, a lot of congrats to you, because it's not, but a lot of it is part of you and your team's hard work to change in the financial sector in that way. So thank you so much for sharing a lot of that. So now I will turn to Messeret Messi. The Canadian Centre for Women's Empowerment is driving change within the financial sector through its task force for women's economic justice, which also includes the Financial and Banking Committee. Its members act as agents of change to remove financial barriers for economic abuse survivors. And could you maybe share more about the committee's members and the work to advocate for victim survivors within the financial sector?
Yeah, thank you so much, Michaela. Sorry, I'm using two screens. I'm not sure where should I watch. So I may not coordinate, like, my...
You're good.
Okay, good. So, okay. Thank you so much, first of all, Dr. Nicola. I know it's too late. Rebecca as well. Thank you so much for all your support. And I'm so honored to join this panel, with you. We really appreciate, your continued support. I have to say that. So thank you again. So back to your question. Yes, in 2019 and 2020, we had a support group, which this support group is run by victims of domestic violence. And then we had a chance to explore the barriers and the needs of survivors of economic abuse. So through that conversation, one of the challenge was, we heard that there was safe banking was a big issue, and it's also one of the barriers for many survivors. So in order to bring a collective action, we established this task force out of that conversation. So in 2020, we call all financial institution leaders, advocates, women's service organization in Canada to come in to join this collective initiative. So the goal was, of course, still now the goal is this committee, they can help us to respond to economic abuse, develop guidelines or best practices, and also help us to identify and then responses, because this work is very intersectional. We need a collective effort, and plus the context also very complex when we discuss with survivors. So their primary role right now is creating a collective solution through our ongoing learning and ongoing meetings. And then also they will help us to develop a process in order to engage financial institutions. And plus, we feel like this committee would be a bridge for us, like connecting us to the financial institution and also the community services. So they played a crucial role, especially in 2020 and 2021. We developed few policy recommendations for Financial Consumer Agency Canada, for Canadian banks, including credit collectors. So that best practice would be a foundation for all Canadian financial institutions if they want to tackle economic abuse. So our approach is, as you know, it's a little bit structured. It's not an ad hoc group of committees. So they meet every 3 months. They discuss issues. They have their own term of reference and agenda. But like still, we are learning a lot because everybody have diverse expertise on the sectors. And hopefully I will also develop various best practices and various process and protocol for futures like intervention. So it's all about our finance task force. As she mentioned, we have 2 task forces, finance and policy. We split it into 2 groups because finance is different sector, and the policy and advocacy, basically they help us to identify the structural barriers and to influence public policy and then advocacy. So that's why we set up. But we're very happy and then honored to work with this expertise. They're so amazing, especially this year. We have seen a lot of major banks. They came and then, hey, this is our issues. They attend our meeting, contribute in our documentation. They share, even some of them are in our vision. So it's a huge milestone in Canada, because when I started this organization, it was even very hard for me to reach out, even the bank manager, credit collectors. But now we have a lot of people, they understand our issue, share our causes for everywhere, which is a huge honor for us. And I really, again, thank you so much for all task force members.
Thank you so much, Messi. Yeah, and I noticed a lot of our task force members are actually joining us today. So a big shout out to you as well. And we will hear from Gilberto and Millie later on, who are also part of our task force. So yeah, on my behalf as well, thanks a lot to everyone. Great. So I thought, yeah, it was really interesting to see how each organization has approached their advocacy work slightly from a different way, whether now through setting up specialized money clinics or with training to assist survivors, or then really working to establish a financial abuse code for all of financial institutions and to participate, or as well, again, through a specific group of like agents of change that then influence the financial sector from within. So yeah, I thought it was quite interesting to hear from the different ways organizations approach it. So now for my second question, it's slightly twofold, but it will be, I will ask each of you the same question. So I would like to focus more on the broader context, so the financial barriers that still exist, but also some of the positive advancement that we're seeing. So again, I would like you to keep it to 5 minutes, your answers, and I would then start again with Rebecca. So please, I would like to hear from you. Where do you still see, like in Australia now, remaining challenges in the financial sector? But also, what policy and institutional changes do you see that give you kind of hope for a more inclusive financial sector in the future?
I also want to just have a quick moment of celebrating everything that has changed in the last, really probably 5 to 8 years in Australia, that, the financial sector is not just come a long way, but is probably leading corporate Australia in terms of its responses to domestic and family violence. And, we've seen the Banking Association issue a new code with updated guidance in terms of responding to not just domestic and family violence, but to financial abuse specifically. And they've really gone on a journey. They've gone on a journey from sort of working to understand the issue better, to know that if they're going to start talking about this issue, they've got to be ready to be able to support their own people. And then once they have a better response to employees, how are they going to support their customers? And I think what's exciting about where we're at now is they're taking the next step, which is thinking about how do we design our products and how do we design our services in a way that works towards prevention, or at the very least harm mitigation. So I think from our perspective, something we're really keen to see financial institutions and in fact governments, I think probably we need a multi-sector approach on this, is how do we reimagine a mortgage? How do we reimagine a mortgage to prevent survivors and their children being turfed out of their homes when they separate from an abusive partner? So we're seeing the money clinics continue to inform our advocacy, as does our lived experience advisory panel. That's always at the core of what we're doing. And what we're seeing is really quite a nonsensical situation of mothers being told they can't afford a mortgage on their own, despite the fact that they've already been paying it on their own, but they can't get the perpetrator off the mortgage because they don't meet the criteria. And of course, they're ending up in private rentals, paying as much for a rental as they would have for a mortgage. It doesn't make sense. It's got long-term economic consequences and devastating consequences, of course, at that individual level. So it's a big thorny one. I don't think it's impossible. I really think that there's that we can solve this if people, commit the time to the cause. The second bit of your question, what is the thing that gives me hope? I think I mentioned that kind of turning to how do we prevent and disrupt and mitigate harm. And there's been mention of the paper that we published last year designed to disrupt reimagining banking products to improve financial safety. And there is a breakout. This is my turn for an ad, Nick. Catherine's doing a breakout on Design to Disrupt after this, so well worth joining that too. But I guess seeing the response to that paper over the last year, where we have now seen Australia's 4 biggest banks and a couple of others now actually change their terms and conditions on a number of products to say, we're drawing a line in the sand. Financial abuse is unacceptable conduct and there will be consequences. So I think that on several levels, that's really important. It's really important symbolically, but it also means that that's the new contract they have with a customer, and it gives them more options where they've previously been hamstrung to say, actually, we can take action now. We can support survivors now. So I'm really encouraged by that, and encouraged because it's, there's clearly an appetite to go further with that. And so I'm just I'm excited by what's possible, and I hope banks will continue the work.
Oh, that's exciting. Thank you so much, Rebecca. That's great to hear. And Nicola, now to you, basically the same question. Where do you see remaining barriers in the UK's financial sector? But again, also what gives you hope for a future that could change?
So same question and same starting point, actually, as is the case in Australia. So we've been doing a lot of work with UK finance and financial services firms in the last year or so around piloting an information sharing tool called the Economic Abuse Evidence Form. And that proves that economic abuse has happened, so that the financial services firm are using that as their starting point to then make decisions in terms of various different outcomes. We've piloted it in relation to the issue of coerced debt, because we know that 60% of victims and survivors of economic abuse in the UK are forced into debt. 3-4 years ago, that average debt was around £4,600. That average debt in the last quarter, in relation to figures shared by our frontline partner Money Advice Plus, is £27,000. So we've seen more than 5 times the average debt. And that's just in relation to unsecured lending. And so that pilot's going really well in that space. But the secured lending piece, so the mortgages piece or the home loans, is the really complicated piece, both in relation to delinking, so removing a party, from a joint loan, and also what that means in terms of affordability for the survivor on their own, as Beck said, who's quite often been the person paying that mortgage all that time anyway. So we've put together a bit of a briefing paper around this, and we are talking to industry, and we're waiting for a UK finance report, which is going to explore this in a bit more detail in the next couple of weeks or so. So, it feels, my hope is always that, these issues are on the agenda and that they're always being moved forward, and there's real champions, I guess, in that space. So I'd say the second key thing linked to that would be credit ratings for us. So certainly we know victims and survivors aren't able to move on a lot of the time because their credit rating reflects the abuse that they experienced and they're not their behaviour. So we're lucky, again, we've got some legislation which is going through Parliament at the moment called the Victim and Prisoners Bill, and we'll be seeking to introduce an amendment to that. And actually it follows Canadian practice here, where criminal courts certainly might be able to order that a victim survivor's credit rating is restored to what it was before they met the abuser, which would put them in a much better situation moving forward. So that would be very exciting. I think 2 other things I would just mention really quickly. We are survivor-centred at Surviving Economic Abuse. All the work that we do is based on what victims and survivors tell us. And at the minute, we've been doing an exciting piece of work around building a survivor needs framework, which is looking at intersecting inequalities, so speaking to women who might be outside the banking sector actually, and how do we ensure that we reach all women through the work that we do, not just those who do engage with financial services in the traditional sense, I guess. Which kind of brings me to the last piece and the hope for the future again, is how do we create a cross-industry response? So how do we ensure that we link up all the different organisations working in this space, because we know victims and survivors will have debts in relation to banks, they'll have debts in relation to public agencies, for example, so things like council tax, which is something that people in the UK pay to access services in their local area, maybe overpayments of benefits and other monies that they have received from government, which are then retrieved. So it's really important that we join up and we're consistent, again, not only within the financial services industry as we're describing it in terms of the banking sector today, but across the public and private spaces, and the formal and the informal spaces as well. So that's where we're got our sights on for the future.
Sorry, amazing. Thank you so much, Nicola, for that. And then finally, Messi, to you, same question. So where do you see some of the systemic barriers for survivors that still exist in Canada to access financial services, but also some of the developments that you're seeing, which are signs of positive change in that regard?
Yeah, As you know, in Canada, it's not like UK and Australia because you are way advanced. We are still like, you know, doing the initial step of work. That's what we have seen. So one of the challenges that frequently mentioned on victims, even sometimes we receive a lot of email from victims, you know, in our community. There's a lack of coordinated response in the community. Like that's also another issue. So meaning survivors, they may be impacted by financial abuse or economic abuse, but there is no any coordinated support system for them so that like they can recover from this kind of violence. So I think that's one of the issue. And then the other challenge is lack of knowledge. Of course, economic abuse is very complex, even to understand for service providers. Still, we have seen that there is a misunderstanding of this form of violence. So that's why we proposed in our even state of economic abuse, definitely awareness, educations is very important for those people who work on the financial sector. And then the other thing is lack of a designated person in the bank. I know there are a few banks, they have a very good program for victims of human trafficking. So I want to see all Canadian banks, credit collectors, you know, mortgage companies to have some programs that really helps for them. As you know, employment sabotage is part of economic abuse. And also I know all organizations, especially corporate worlds, they are working aggressively for workplace gender-based violence, you know, policies. I think integrating those pieces as well, that would be, it would be a very good, like, you know, startup. And then the other thing is, of course, data is very important. Evidence is very important. Would love also financial institution if they could find a way to collect those clients, like, you know, issues and problem on the sector. I think whenever we have those informations, when we collect data, definitely even for us, for service organization, it will help us to generate further programming and also for policy change. So data is the most important thing. And then the other thing is, as I mentioned, there is a gap between social services and then financial institutions. That's what we have seen. One of the challenge, maybe, as I said, we have a very nice model in our community, which is called the Community Integrated Response Model for Victims of Gender-Based Violence. That model, sometimes it doesn't include economic and financial abuse. So I think there should be a way how banks and social services, they could work together. I know Scotiabank has also started some initiative. So I think that would be also another hope for other banks. The other problem is, as you know, technology is also one of the challenge. We are asking women to use digital banking. So we are also exposing them for financial crime and cyberbullying, you know, a lot of things. So I think banks, they should have also some policies and procedures so that women will have safe and equitable banking services. I think those are the most important thing, like we need to ask Canadian banks to address this issue. I know you cannot address by themselves, but organizations like us, like other service organizations, we can collaborate and then bring some changes. And then also we want to engage also men, you know, we shouldn't disregard the involvement of men. I think what I believe as advocates, we need to especially educate those people who commit this kind of, like, you know, violence, especially in the racialized community, newcomers and immigrant. Financial and economic abuse, it seems a normal because that's a norm out there. So I think we need to break also that barrier. So banks, if they could have any programs that address workplace gender-based violence, it's good to include, and you know, it's good to include, like, you know, men is also as a part of this change. I think that's what I would like to mention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Messi. Yeah, it's still quite a lot to be done. But I think you touched on really some important issues that and barriers that still remain, and we still have to work on. But like, we can definitely look then towards Australia and the UK for inspiration. And yeah, I think for this, also the part of the reason why we're hosting this event, to really gain best practice examples from each other and learn from each other of what is possible and some strategies that work. So I think in the end of this discussion, I think we're at sharp at 11. I just saw that there are, I think, two brief questions that came up. I think both are for you, Rebecca. So I think, actually, the one I think was, the question was if something like the money clinics also exist in Canada. So actually, maybe it's more for you, Messi, to answer. So do something like this specialized services or clinics for survivors exist? to assist them with any issues or money issues they have coming out of relationships?
Yes, I know Victim Service Toronto. That's what we refer always. It was a project initiated in 2017 with our advocate. I know he's not here today, Richard. So Project Recover definitely is a help women who's impacted by human trafficking and gender-based violence. So this project is right now run by Victim Service Toronto. I know there are a few people are here. And also there is a program in Alberta, I forgot the name. It was initiated in 2015, but I'm not sure that program still exists. Yeah, those are the two programs I know in Canada so far.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And then we have another question to you, Rebecca. So the question was asked in French, so I will just repeat it real quick. Est-ce que les cliniques donnent des services dans une langue différente à l'anglais pour les nouveaux immigrants qui ne maîtrisent pas la langue? So basically the question is if those money clinics that you referred to, are they only provided in English, or are they also like available in other languages for example, immigrants or newcomers that maybe don't speak English?
So in Australia, we're lucky enough to have a government-funded translating and interpreting service that is available for free for services like ours. And so anyone in any language can make an appointment with us through the translating and interpreting service. It's not a perfect system in that you know, some communities are small enough that, you know, if there's someone working as an interpreter, that they may be known in that community. So it's not perfect. It is something, and it certainly we have used that service to be able to deliver money clinics to people who are much more comfortable in a different language. But it's an ongoing challenge. We do produce a financial safety sort of checklist for people who may, you know, just want to quietly think about something themselves without actually talking to someone. And that's something we've produced in 8 languages. But again, there's always demand for more. So the short answer is yes.
Okay, great. I think, well, that's yeah, I can imagine it's still like difficult, but I think that's great that you have the service available. I just wanted to also mention, yeah, thank you, Nicola. You mentioned the equivalent national program in the UK is run by SIA's frontline partner, Money Advice Plus. And she also shared the link in the chat. So if somebody is interested, that would be the equivalent to the money clinics in the UK. I think for now, I don't see any other questions, and we're also right on time. If there are any remaining questions, feel free then to email us later on, and we can pass them on to the panelists if there are any more questions later on. So yeah, I think then I will close this panel. Thanking you again so much, Rebecca, for staying up with us, and also for you and Nicola. Thank you, Messi, for really insightful conversations and kicking us off in this summit. So with that, I will give it back to Molly.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. So we are going to move into the breakout sessions now. I'm going to share my screen again. And I'll pull up for everyone the breakout sessions so that you can see what they are again, as I know some folks may have forgotten. Perfect. So you should see now the breakout sessions on your screen. And the way this is going to work is that I'm going to open breakout rooms for everyone. And once those rooms are open, they're going to be labeled breakout with the names, the titles of the breakout sessions. So there will be 3 breakout rooms. You will be able to self-select which breakout session you would like to join. If you have any issues with finding the breakout sessions, or you're not sure how it works, please just reach out in the chat and we'll figure that out for you and make sure that you're able to get into the session that you want. But it should be a fairly simple process. So we'll be in the breakout sessions for until 11:50, maybe 11:55, just because of the timing. And then you will have a break after the breakout sessions end. I'll leave the breakout rooms open in case the conversations are just really great and you don't want them to end yet. Then we will we'll leave them open. You can stay and continue chatting with folks, but just know that the break is about a 10-minute break. So if you continue to chat, you will miss out on your break there. I will close the breakout sessions at noon. You'll all come back to the main room, at which point we'll do a bit of a reflection exercise as a group and a sharing of learnings as a group. So I'm going to go ahead and open all of the rooms now, and you will get notifications to choose which room you'd like to join. And as a reminder, the breakout room numbers correspond to the breakout rooms that you're going to be able to join. For those who haven't been able to select a breakout room, may have to be the case is that you're going to join this breakout session, which we're going to do in the main room, which is the first breakout session. So I hope you'll still be happy to participate in this conversation. I'm very sorry about it. And so if you guys can come on camera, as soon as you come on camera, you'll be visible to everyone in the main room, and unmute as well. And then we are good to get started. I'm sorry about that, but I'm going to hand it over to you, Lauren.
Thank you so much. So I can't now see participants. Is that correct, Molly?
Yes, you won't be able to see the participants, unfortunately, but I guarantee they can all see you.
Okay, good. Thank you all for being here. Those of you who intended to be here and those of you who have ended up here unintentionally. I really hope it's going to be worth your while. I'm sure it is, because we've got some fantastic speakers joining us today. So just as a brief introduction, and I will keep this short because we're a little bit pushed for time now. So my name is Lauren, and I'm the Financial Services Manager at Surviving Economic Abuse. And you've just heard from our founder and CEO, Dr. Nicola Sharp-Jeffs, explaining a little bit more about our work. Today, we're going to be talking about financial services within the UK and how financial services are supporting victim survivors of domestic and economic abuse. And it's my absolute pleasure to be joined by a number of speakers from some of our partner firms who we work closely with at C. So I'm joined by Jane Roderick, who is the Head of Strategy and Engagement and Customer Inclusion at Lloyds Banking Group. I'm joined by Kate Oshodiak, who is Head of Responsible Business at TSB. And I'm also joined by Charity Wood, who is Head of Customer Experience at Starling Bank. So I'm going to start by just giving you a little bit of an overview of the work that we do at Surviving Economic Abuse, because my brief for this particular panel was to give an overview of the policy landscape within the UK. But I personally think it's much more interesting to get into the nitty-gritty of what firms are actually doing to support survivors. And that's why I've invited our speakers along today. So just to give an overview of the work that we do at C. So we refer to ourselves as C, Surviving Economic Abuse. So we were founded in 2017 by our founder and CEO, Dr. Nicola Sharp-Jeffs. And it's our vision to create a world in which women and girls achieve economic equality and can live their lives free of abuse and exploitation. And our mission is to raise awareness of economic abuse and to transform responses to it. And we do that through working in 4 key ways. So the first is by raising public awareness of what economic abuse is. So there's public understanding so that survivors who may be actually experiencing this know what it is and can put a name to it. We also work alongside professionals, be that in the women's sector or the financial services sector, which is the work that myself and my team do to ensure that, again, they can identify what economic abuse is and can respond appropriately to support customers. Next, we work with decision makers, so be that in government, looking at policy, regulation, and making changes that support survivors.
And finally, but what I would say is the most important part of our work is working alongside survivors whose lived experience shapes everything that we do here at SEE. So to give you an overview of the policy landscape within the UK, it's probably quite important to start with the Domestic Abuse Act, which came into force in 2021 and became statute. And actually, the 2021 Domestic Abuse Act recognised economic abuse as a form of domestic abuse within the UK for the first time. And that was a seismic shift for us because it gave survivors a name for the experience that they've had and to be able to seek recourse, be that through financial services or other means. And so since that time, what we've actually seen is an increase in the prevalence of economic abuse. So the number of people experiencing domestic abuse has gone from 1 in 6 to 2 in 5. So around that time, SEE also campaigned for the criminalisation of the coercive and controlling behaviour offence of the Serious Crime Act here in the UK, to extend to post-separation. Now, the Serious Crime Act is the only way in which economic abuse at the moment within the UK can be criminalised. And so extending that to post-separation was a huge win for us because we know that post-separation is a time when survivors are actually at most risk. And all of that within the policy landscape has happened alongside a number of changes within financial services here within the UK. So our regulator outlined some guidance called the Fair Treatment, the guidance for the fair treatment of vulnerable customers. So it's got a very snazzy name, which we all remember. And in that, economic abuse was recognised and called out as a driver of vulnerability. And that sets a number of standards for firms when responding to survivors. Alongside that, we had UK Finance publish a financial abuse code, which we worked alongside them to create. And I know Nick spoke to that a moment ago. And essentially, this code is voluntary, but it outlines best practice for the industry, be that flexibility in processes and procedures to support survivors. Also things like tell us once policies so that survivors aren't having to repeat their story multiple times. But some of the newest guidance that we've had within the UK is a consumer duty, which was announced by our financial services regulator earlier this year, where it came into force. And essentially that sets a higher bar for financial services when thinking about consumer protections. And that's for all consumers, but of course, vulnerable consumers are a focus within that. And what that seeks to do is look at foreseeable harms that vulnerable customers and all customers might be facing and puts an onus on firms to reduce those foreseeable harms. And at SEE, we see the consumer duty as being a real opportunity for firms to transform the way that they're responding to economic abuse, because the consumer duty looks at the whole consumer life cycle. So it's looking at the products and services that firms provide. It's looking at the way in which firms provide support to customers, the way in which information is provided to ensure that customers can understand the information, and also that the price and value of products is fair. And of course, that's particularly relevant for survivors where actually they might receive a worse off deal because of the abuse that they've experienced. So for instance, if their credit rating has been impacted and they can't get credit through normal means, or perhaps have to opt for higher cost credit. And so that's my whistle-stop tour of the policy landscape within the UK and financial services. And I guess set alongside that backdrop, we've seen some really, really fantastic practice within financial services. And this is what our panelists are going to speak to us more about, but be that branches becoming safe spaces within the UK, or firms offering emergency flee funds to actually support survivors who are in immediate need, or be that, like I mentioned, greater flexibility in processes that means that survivors can be taken off of joint accounts when it's clear that a perpetrator isn't consenting, or perhaps there might be concessions around a mortgage where it's clear that the perpetrator is deliberately not agreeing to a change in rate, which is forcing the survivor into financial difficulty. So these are just some examples, but what's going to be lovely is me to hand over to our panelists who can share more about the work that they are doing. And we're going to kick off with Jane Roderick, who's going to talk to us more about the work that Lloyds Banking Group are doing in the UK to support survivors. And actually, Jane is a true customer advocate and has embraced and championed inclusion and diversity within Lloyds Banking Group. And has collaborated with a number of other services and the third sector, including surviving economic abuse, to ensure that products are designed that are inclusive for all customers. And what Jane is going to speak to us about today is the partnership that Lloyds Banking Group have with us here at Surviving Economic Abuse. It's been a long-standing partnership that was established really right at the start of C's journey. Back in 2019, C started to work with Lloyds Banking Group, and we still have a member of my team seconded to Lloyds Banking Group to provide support to their specialist team who support victim survivors. And so with that, I'm going to hand over to Jane. And I guess my first question, I've spoken a lot about the regulation and guidance within the UK, but of course what that looks like in reality and how that's interpreted by each financial service will be different depending on its size and the nature of its operation. And I guess what would be really great as a starting question would be if you could tell us more about how Lloyds Banking Group are currently supporting survivors of economic abuse.
Yeah, no, sure. I'm actually just going to take us back slightly, just to give it a bit of context, if that's okay, Lauren. So, as you say, we've like other firms have looked at this now for several years, and kind of looked to understand how do we evolve our service offering to help customers, sort of victim survivors. I guess the key thing I probably just called out at the beginning is one of the things. So we're a large organisation in the UK, and right at the start of this journey, we recognise the need to make sure we were also looking after colleagues. So almost before we kind of look after customers, we had to in parallel make sure that we had colleague support. So this particular topic we definitely do in parallel with the two the two views, I guess. In terms of I mean, you covered a lot of the support we offer, probably in the outline. So I'm going to talk I'll talk about the things we can do, and then how we do that, maybe just towards the end. So I mean, you covered a range of things we do, from kind of account separation to account opening, through keep kind of what we maybe call safe sort codes, so that it's not identifiable from a geographical location where a customer might be. How do you open those accounts if you're in a refuge, you don't have access to an address, or you don't have ID? So there's quite a lot of work in that space around that separation. Things like we changed our T's and C's to be able to remove another party from an account if we had identified an abusive situation, through to things like on our websites, we now have a kind of the safe exit button, so that if you are looking for information that many of the firms will have, you can exit that safely with no history, no kind of record of what you're looking at. And I guess a kind of number of other pieces, from looking at debt and things, and happy to take any kind of questions. I'll kind of stay at a high level, but happy to take any questions. I think the interesting thing for us has been, you alluded to, is we have a large branch network, so many of those things are able to be done through our branch network, through our colleagues who receive specialist training that actually Surviving Economic Abuse and another domestic abuse charity helped us create and keep us kind of refreshed with. But we did create a what we'd call a specialist support team, so a telephony-based team, which is how we do a lot of our specialist support, where we have a number of colleagues, we've just expanded it actually, have got a deeper training, so more specialist knowledge to deliver those services, and kind of really kind of take that that victim survivor-led approach, that kind of from a position of trust. What can we do? How do we have a kind of case management approach to helping customers in clearly a very vulnerable situation, to help them get back to their financial independence?
Brilliant. And are you able to tell us a bit more specifically about how that team supports survivors, and maybe the rationale for setting up the team? Because not all financial services within the UK do have specialist teams like this. It's something that's quite unique to Lloyds Banking Group. So yeah, can you tell us a little bit more about thinking and what the impact of that team has been? There's a number of questions I've just embedded into that one there, Jane.
No, sure. Yeah, so I mean, for us, we recognise the complexity of this challenge, and actually the need to have a kind of holistic view for the customer. So we have a number of brands in our portfolio, a number of different products, but actually as a victim survivor in this space, how do you have that one conversation and look across all of your products? How do you develop that empathy and understanding, and actually having a specialist team that can focus in on that and look at that in more detail was one of the reasons why we kind of looked at that. The other area was that kind of how do we work with charities? So we work with a number of our own foundation charities and others to kind of find a pathway in to kind of understand what customers need in this space. So it was really for us around how do you create that kind of deep understanding and empathy for a customer to give them the empowerment to do some of the things you might need to do to support a customer who's been through this experience. Two things I'd probably add on to that. One we'll probably come on to in a bit more detail in a second, but as you alluded to, we did quite early on, partly to help with our own risk assessment, actually, partly to understand when we were looking at perhaps writing off debt or looking at other solutions, how do we do that from an understanding perspective? We're not the expert. We recognise that we're not the expert, and we wouldn't want to become the expert in domestic abuse. That's not our skill set. But we recognise then a level of expertise was needed. So that's why we have somebody from Surviving Economic Abuse embedded into our operation to help us with that kind of knowledge and understanding. And then we have an escalation, what we would call an escalation panel. So another panel that kind of looks at those really complex cases, the policy makers or kind of those positions inside the group that can look at what might be those additional decisions we need to make. And we have a kind of panel review process that kind of happens weekly, depending on how many cases we have, which again, we bring Surviving Economic Abuse into to help us with our decision making. So that's give you a summary, hopefully.
And what would you say the biggest impact has been on survivors in having that holistic approach?
I mean, I probably could almost ask you the same question, Lauren, actually. So I think what do I think? I mean, to be able to come from a position of trust, to be able to come from a position of belief to somebody that you're not asking for lots and lots of pieces of information, you're understanding and listening, and to be able to come up with a range of solutions that can help a customer, I think is truly impactful and kind of why we're here. So I think, yeah, hugely positive.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Perhaps just to add to that, when you said, like, you could ask me the same question, I think what we hear from survivors is so on average they will have within the UK between 5 and 9 different creditors, and so that might mean engaging with 5 or 9 different financial services, and that can be really re-traumatizing to have to retell the story multiple times, and actually being passed from pillar to post within a particular organisation again is really re-traumatizing. So the fact that Lloyds Banking Group has one team where they're allocated to one person, they have to tell their story one time, that's really empowering and reassuring for that survivor that actually there's somebody there who understands. A lot of what we hear from survivors is it's just feeling validated and listened to and understood, that you're already halfway there. And then it's about thinking about how we can fix the issue with the financial product, but actually just understanding their circumstances and being able to provide that support and letting them know that they're not alone, I think is really, really key. So that's definitely something that I know the team are able to do from the work that we do and from what we hear from survivors. So yeah, it has a huge impact. Thank you so much. And then also, in terms of, so this team has been set up now since 2019, and you mentioned that it's been expanded recently, which to me would suggest that it's been successful. And I guess if there were any learnings from the work that you've done at Lloyds Banking Group that could be transferred to other firms that perhaps aren't as far in their journey in supporting survivors, what do you think those learnings would be? What would be the key things that other firms could implement?
So I guess if you're thinking specifically about why a specialist support team, what have we learned from taking that approach? I would say it's allowed us to test more. So things like we were, I think, the first organisation, or one of the first organisations to pilot the economic abuse evidence form, for example, using this team to help us understand what that looked like, what difference did that make in terms of the experience for victims, survivors, and our customers. So it allows us to keep understanding, keep developing, keep looking at what's next. What there's clearly more to do. It also allows us to, with the support of having expertise embedded in the operation, I think the two things kind of gone together for us quite well. It allows us to have that really important holistic conversation, given we know unfortunately some customers aren't aware of their products, or didn't are kind of just understanding what position they might be in and how can we help. So I think it definitely makes sense to start small. We definitely started very small for us, and have tested and learned and started off with a few things that the team could do, and have expanded the things the team could do as we felt comfortable and grown in confidence. So really that kind of agile approach, start small. What do you understand? As that goes and your customer need grows, working with experts allows you to continue to embed that service, I think.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. And you mentioned there, I'm just throwing in one final question, Joan, I hope that's okay. You mentioned about the economic abuse evidence form.
Yeah.
Again, how has that been received within Lloyds Banking Group, the colleagues who are utilising the form, and also what would you say has been the impact for survivors?
So I think, it clearly has some teething problems, as anything would do. But I think, the principle of it, that kind of only sharing the information once, definitely, we're really supportive of. To your point about the number of creditors, be that in the financial services or elsewhere in the UK, you may have. I think if we think about it from our colleague perspective, actually, the form enables us to receive the information that we need to make some of the decisions we may need to make and have that kind of interaction. But it allows the customer to not share really re-traumatizing information that's not necessary. And equally for our colleagues, they don't receive and read that information because you weren't quite sure what information you were due to be was needed for that. So I think it really helps set some of those boundaries to protect the customer and also protect the colleague. Would probably be
yeah, absolutely. No, that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. That's great for us to hear. Thank you so much. So just to let you all know, we will be opening for some questions at the end. But I'm going to hand over to Kate now, if that's okay. So Kate is the head of responsible business at TSB, and has worked for almost 3 decades within the retail banking sector, and has a career, I've just given a little bio overview of our speakers, a career that spans frontline customer delivery, program management, corporate communications, and responsible business. And in 2020, she helped create and now leads TSB's responsible business program, Do What Matters. So she's responsible for driving the bank's social and environmental commitments under that plan, and together promotes financial and social inclusion, encouraging good business practice, and supporting the transition to a greener planet. And of course, all of that encompasses the work that Kate does with TSB to support victim survivors of domestic abuse. And Kate has certainly spearheaded that at TSB. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Kate, to tell us a little bit more about TSB's approach to supporting survivors.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren, and hello, everybody. So at TSB, we believe really strongly that it's everybody's business to lean in and to support survivor victims, because it's a collective social issue and a responsibility of all of us to make a change. We also think that you need to go beyond signposting and awareness. And whilst that's very good and there's a place for that, actually the time is for action. And at TSB, one of the things that we've really focused in on is having kind of a process that uses data and kind of training of colleagues to spot the signs and intervene early. We then move into kind of a robust package of support around crises intervention. So some of the stuff that Jane's talked about, we do at TSB and actually across our industry in the UK we deliver. And then going beyond kind of crisis support, we have this focus on how we help victim survivors to thrive and survive. So it's how they re-enter back into society and don't become financially excluded, which is kind of the long tail impact of financial and economic abuse. So that's kind of our approach, Lauren. I don't know if you want me to cover any more.
No, that's really helpful, particularly what you're saying about surviving and thriving, because that is a phrase that we use at Surviving Economic Abuse when thinking about our tools to thrive for survivors, which are on our website. Just a little plug there for the information that we have. But yeah, so last year TSB actually introduced a Flee Fund, which is a much needed emergency support for survivors who are in an abusive situation. So it'd be really interesting if you could tell us a little bit more about the thinking behind that and the impact that that has had.
Yeah. So as you said, so last December we launched a Flee Fund. So it's for our customers who are looking to flee an abusive relationship. The fund is basically a gift of anywhere between £50 and £500. And, we train our colleagues to be able to have guided conversations with the customers to understand exactly what they need so that they are, taking what they need. And quite often we find that, victim survivors don't think about all of the different eventualities. Where the Flee Fund came from, we started back in 2021 where we opened up our branches as safe spaces. So this was training our colleagues to be able to offer and direct individuals that were coming into our branches a safe space where they could, seek refuge and to get connected to services that they needed. We were really blown away by the response that we had from our colleagues about how positive they felt about this activity. And we were also kind of really blown away by the response that we had from our customers and from our communities. And it really made us think that actually there's more we could do in this space. And so, we came up with this notion that we wanted to probably step more into the survive and thrive space. So we started talking to, SEE and other domestic abuse charities in the UK to say, right, what can we do? How can we help women survive and thrive? And what came back loud and clear to us was that, great, you can do loads of things in that space, but women are dying because they don't have the money to be able to enable them to flee the relationship in the first place. So our one big ask of you, please put your money where your mouth is and do something and help women escape. And it basically turned our thinking on its head, and we then focused in on how we could create our fund. To date, we've had just around 170 people access the fund. The vast majority are women. The fund is open to any one of our customers, and actually we will open accounts for customers if they come to us and they're not our customer. The only reason you have to be a TSB customer is so that we can really make sure that the money is landing up somewhere safe and not being ending up with an abuser is typically it. What that Flee Fund has done is, great, it's offered that escape to those individuals, but it's also opened a conversation and a gateway to lots of other support and services that are available, whether that's safe accounts, whether that's conversations about how we help them with their coerced debt, or whether it is connecting with agencies and services in the community that can to really give them that specialist support that we're just not set up to do. So we're super proud of it. And yeah, one thing I would say, if you're worried about, oh God, that seems like a big commitment. we have found that people who claim on our fund to be entirely honest. We haven't been hit by masses of fraud. So all my credit risk people in the bank told me, we can't do that because everybody will try and steal the money from us. It's a load of bump, really, and it just requires you to be a little bit brave and to test these things out, because there are people out there that need it.
Thank you so much, Kate. It's so powerful to hear you explain the rationale for why TSB have taken this initiative. You said that survivors are dying, and actually put your money where your mouth is. Sorry to quote you back there, but it's so powerful to hear you say that as a financial services firm, that actually that's a lifeline that survivors may not be able to get elsewhere. And we know from our research that women who are unable to access £100 at short notice are 3.5 times more likely to experience domestic abuse. And so, just providing that £70 for someone to book a train ticket, or 50 quid so that they can put food on the table for their kids, that makes a huge difference to somebody's life, both in terms of their physical safety, but also just in terms of their dignity and the way that it makes them feel about themselves. We heard a story from our partner organisation, Money Advice Plus, who were operating a similar fund, where the perpetrator had smashed the toilet seat in their home, and the survivor, didn't have a toilet seat, just needed £20 to replace the toilet seat, and they were able to do that and give them back their dignity. And it's always a story that really stays with me, because it's the little things that make the biggest difference. So I mean, the work that you're doing in that space is fantastic, and is encouraging other firms within the UK to do similar things, which is incredible. Thank you so much. The next question that I had was around the impact that it's had on your colleagues. So you mentioned that part of the reason that this came about was because of the feedback that you were getting from colleagues. And TSB has also recently extended this fund to your colleague. And I guess this chimes in with what Jane was saying about Lloyds Banking Group starting with their people to get it right for their people, and then think about how they can extend this to their customers. So are you able to tell us a little bit more about what the Flea Fund looks like for your colleagues and the impact that that's had?
So it looks exactly the same as it looks for our customers, our colleague fund. I think, and the impact, to date, we haven't had any. We're a much smaller business than James, but to date we haven't had anybody claim on our fund. But what it does is it puts a signal out to our colleagues that we are there, and that this issue isn't just kind of parked in our customer space, isn't just parked out for somebody else in the community. It's actually happening to people that we're sitting alongside in our workplace. And I think that kind of concept that anybody can experience domestic abuse is a really powerful kind of thread to run through this whole piece of work, and that's why we get such kind of support from across the board with it.
Yeah, exactly. Brilliant. And so just finally, similar to the question that I asked Jane, in terms of the learnings from your work with survivors at TSB, what do you think could be adopted by the industry, and what would you like to see happen next? Because there's fantastic things happening, but we know there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, so I think for me, I mean, the Flea Fund, it's lovely to be on here and to say, TSB does the Flea Fund. Quite frankly, we don't want it as a competitive advantage at all. We want everybody to offer it. So it's really that, for me, that would be adopting that, and actually for the government to step in the UK and to make sure that they are offering Flea Funds where, it's not a lottery about which particular bank you bank with, or where in the country that you live, for the services that you get. So that for me is the big learning from it. But the other part of this is, if you're in financial services and there's lots of people telling you no and you can't do something, I say be brave and have a go and push back, and bring the real life experiences around the table, because that really does change mindsets and opinions of people who may not be as awake to the issues as they need to be.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kate. And with that, we're going to move over to Charity. So Charity is joining us from a fintech bank within the UK, Starling Bank. And Charity is the head of customer experience at Starling, and she sits within the intersection of customer service, engineering, and product design teams. So this is ensuring that the bank delivers the best service and experiences for its customers. And Charity has worked within the banking sector for more than 22 years, giving her digital, operational and customer know-how to implement a number of initiatives at Starling, which includes setting up its dedicated specialist support team to support vulnerable customers, but also its Hide reference initiative, which Charity is going to speak to us a little bit more about now. So it's lovely to have you here, Charity. Thank you so much. As a digital bank, you don't have a lot of face-to-face contact with customers, and we've heard from Jane and Kate about sort of branch-facing colleagues, and of course, Starling doesn't have that. So what opportunities do you have to support survivors? Do you find not dealing with them face-to-face causes a problem? And how do you provide support in different ways?
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. So you're right, as a digital bank, you know, there aren't many, you know, sort of face-to-face opportunities. So things like, you know, the safe space initiatives that, you know, we've just heard others talk about, you know, we can't do. And by the way, it's such a brilliant initiative. But I guess, you know, on the whole, we find that kind of our technology first approach, you know, to supporting vulnerable customers and survivors can still be really personal, even if it's not face to face, because we also recognise that, you know, customers also find the ability to free speak, perhaps when they're not as face to face, is somewhat, you know, more comforting. So we're also the only bank in the UK to have kind of real life UK based customer service agents 24/7. So you can contact us by phone, email, in app. You know, we don't have chat bots. So when you are talking to us in those real moments that matter and you need to, you know, it is a human. And essentially, we've trained all of our agents to be able to help customers, you know, when they are sharing information or we are picking up on indicators of vulnerability. To be able to support them. But equally, yes, we do have a specialist support team as well, that's on hand then if, you know, we have a customer that needs further support.
That's brilliant. That's really helpful. And I didn't actually realise that Starling have people responding 24/7.
Yeah.
So that's fantastic, because the chatbots are great, but they can be very frustrating.
Yeah, no chatbots, no IVRs.
Yeah. Do you find that actually that human interaction means that more customers are disclosing when there is vulnerability?
So I think what you tend to find is that a customer will either come to you because they've got a specific piece of information that they want to disclose, or often what you find, because, you know, one of the things that, you know, our whole founding purpose was, you know, our customer centricity. So actually, when you call us because you're trying to do something, actually what we want to understand is the problem that you're trying to solve. And often with the kind of questioning and the understanding of, okay, well, why are you trying to do that? And could you do it another way? Actually then helps us to pick up on perhaps some of the, you know, kind of vulnerabilities or situations that perhaps customers don't always present up front, but actually by having that real empathetic, you know, kind of listening conversation enables them to provide, you know, a little bit more information on why they're trying to do something. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Just before I move on to my next question, I am very conscious of the time. Obviously, we started a bit late, so I'm going to use that as license that we can run a little bit over. But for anybody that does need to drop off and get a cup of tea or have a break, please do so. And we're going to continue our discussion, if that's okay, in the background. So earlier this year, Starling Bank launched its Hide references initiative. Can you tell us about that? What is it, how it came about, and what was the problem that you were trying to address? Yeah, sure. And yeah, we launched in June this year. And essentially what it does is it allows Starling customers to be able to hide a payment reference field literally with a simple tap in the app. So what I guess it was a real coincidence actually as to how it came about, because our engineering team was starting to think about, you know, some of the tech in this space to start with. And then actually what happened was a contact came into us, and a customer called Rebecca ended up speaking to one of the specialist support teams members, because she was receiving abusive messages within the reference field of the payment box. So essentially, you know, what had happened was her ex-partner had, you know, intentionally put her into tens of thousands of pounds worth of debt, and the court had ordered him to pay her back, and she was receiving £30, you know, a week every month. But the reference box he was using to remind her of the physical and the emotional abuse that she went through, and she was trying to work out how she could stop receiving this. And it's a conversation that, you know, I can remember, you know, even to this day, because the emotion in it, you know, we absolutely came away and we were like, we need to fix this problem, you know. And at this point for us, we had only spoken to Rebecca, and so it might have been just one customer, but we knew that, you know, we needed to help her and others in this situation. So that was where, Lauren, we met, because what we wanted to do was really just make sure that we fully understood the problem to solve before we kind of, you know, went into the solution. And, you know, what we recognized as well is that, you know, Rebecca actually didn't really want to be contacting us and giving us all that information. She just wanted to make it stop. So what we enabled was the ability then for any payments that you receive from a particular sort code or an account number, or any way that the payment is identifiable, is you can hide it. And not only will it hide that transaction, it will hide future transactions. So you never need to see those references. If you ever needed them, we've got them and we can provide them, but the customer would never need to see them.
No, it's fantastic. And in terms of the impact that it's had within the UK, are you able to speak a bit more about how it's been shared and what it's perhaps led to at an industry level?
Yeah, so it's really, I suppose it's probably taken us quite by surprise, and we too, you know, speak at and a part of kind of the UK finance working group as well. And so, you know, it's really galvanized lots of interest, not only from I guess our, you know, the kind of technical teams within different banks to go, how have you done it? What does it look like? And actually we've been doing lots of kind of best practice and sharing, you know, to the point raised earlier, which is, you know, this isn't about us all individually doing unique things to be able to, you know, enable people to pick and choose where to go for because they want a particular feature. It's about how do we then help each other build the same type of capability. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah, definitely. I think certainly from what we've seen, the issue is much broader than we realised and then we anticipated. And actually here within the UK, the industry at large is looking to see how this issue can be addressed, because abusive payment references are so intimate and personal to that individual, which means that just a list of, I say just a list, but, you know, a list of profanity filters doesn't always capture everything. So how did you go about building the abusive payment blocks? How did that work?
Great question. And this is probably where I need Ollie, who is often with me when we chat about this, to talk about it in a little more detail. But yeah, essentially, because, you know, I guess, you know, we built the bank, and, you know, we were, you know, the kind of first digital bank back in 2016, when we 2014, sorry, when Anne, you know, was disrupting the industry, and then sort of 2016 when we went on, is that we've got the ability to, you know, make the changes and the enhancements within our tech. So actually, yeah, it was about taking that kind of character reference field and working with that so that, you know, our systems in the back end could retain the information, but we were able to surface what the customer wanted to see and give them the control over that. So technically, I can't answer your question, but essentially how it works is they press a button and it just disappears.
I mean, it's fantastic, and what it does is empower the survivor again, as we mentioned before, and that's a theme that's threaded through everything that we've spoken about today. And so my final question, I mentioned the Consumer Duty and the regulation that's been set out by the Financial Conduct Authority here within the UK. And that means banks are focusing on good outcomes for all customers. And what would you say has been the impact of that at Starling in terms of how it supports survivors?
Yeah, great question. And I think when you think of Starling, actually we've been operating in the spirit of the Consumer Duty for a long time. Our whole founding mission was to change banking for good, and to put customers first. And the Hyde References is a really great example of, as we said at that point, we only knew one story, and it wasn't until we started to pull the thread we understood, to your point, that actually there were many more customers who needed this type of support and control over it, so that, absolutely, they don't even need to contact us, they do it themselves. But we've also seen other use cases that this type of capability now has helped. And so, we implemented Hyde References before the duty really came in to effect. But this is absolutely the sort of tech, as we've already said, we want, all other banks to be looking at. We also need to learn and see what other banks are doing to ensure that we all, deliver, good outcomes. But, looking ahead, I guess, one of the things that we're really thinking about is, when people are setting up or they've fled and they're, trying to create the new world for them, is how do we support them from a digital bank perspective when often they're fleeing without ID or anything that enables them to start and build their new and own identity. And, so, we're really starting to think about that space.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for joining us and sharing the fantastic work that you're doing. To wrap up the session, and I would like to invite everybody who is in the room to take part. This is a 30-second exercise, and then we will be bringing the session to a close. But I wanted our panelists to just have some blue sky thinking about if there's one thing that the financial services sector could do, and this can be within the UK or internationally, in your opinion, to support survivors, what would have the biggest impact? And I'm going to drop that in the chat, and I'll come to you first, Jane, your 30-second answer. And for anybody who is listening in and would like to add their thoughts, please do utilise the chat, because I'd love to hear from you to see how we can really think about what those challenges are and how we might overcome them. Over to you, Jane.
I'm going to kind of give you two in 30 seconds if I can. So I think one is consistency. I mean, you've had some great, fantastic examples across the sector where we've where different stages, different solutions we've looked at. I think how we do that as a sector consistently is a challenge, but I think it would make the biggest difference for all of our customers. And the second one I would say is, how do we raise awareness, both of the support we offer, but also of this topic, to help customers perhaps identify or question whether this is something they're experiencing earlier in their journey, so we can reach out and help them a little bit earlier as well. So that would probably be my two.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And over to you, Kate.
Yeah, so for me, I think the biggie and one of the toughest things we face into is our treatment of coerced debt. So it's a bit like Jane's perspective, this consistent view on it, but it requires actually broader industry beyond banking and moving into our legal sector as well to make sure that we've got the right constructs in place that enable victim survivors to, to not feel the long tail impact of abuse. So that's it for me.
Thank you. And finally, Charity?
So I completely echo both of those points. And I think, consistency is critical. I think as well for us, it's now that we're starting to learn more and understanding the adjustments that people need from their banking is how do we then utilize the data in the best and most safest way to start to proactively engage, which is a really sensitive, difficult space to be in. But we're recognizing, you know, patterns and understandings of stuff that does happen pre to the event. And so, yeah, how do we use that with the best intentions for the customer?
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic answers. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry for overrunning and eating into your break. I hope that session was useful for you. Apologies for not being able to get to any questions, but I will review the chat and get back to anybody that has any burning questions, and do feel free to drop me an email and I'll be more than happy to answer. Thank you so much. Sorry, Molly, I'll hand back over to you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you all. And that was a great, I think, way to end that session, because we are going to get into some reflection and blue sky thinking now. So welcome back to the main room, everyone. I'm going to if you give me one moment, I will share my screen. Great. So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the breakout sessions. Thank you so much for your participation. I'm sure the I heard some input from the teams as they were happening around the conversation. So I'm excited to head into a bit of a group reflection, particularly as I know, and I really want to apologize for those who weren't able to join the conversations that they wanted to join, the breakout sessions they wanted to join due to some Zoom issues. That was a great panel led by Lauren, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Anyways, and hopefully this is now an opportunity for you to hear a bit about what happened in the other two breakout rooms. So we're going to do a little bit of a version of a stop, start, continue. But we're going to do challenges, barriers, and bad practice, current interventions, biggest takeaways, and big ideas, future visions, next steps. I guess we're going to have to do this differently then. So what we're going to do is we're going to do it live. And we're going to do it in the chat. I'm going to start with the questions that we had. We'll go back to this. Great. So I'm going to start with the questions, challenges, barriers, and bad practice. So thinking of the conversations that you just engaged in, what are some of the challenges and barriers? What do we need to stop doing to improve outcomes for survivors? I'd love to hear some ideas in the chat, or as I said, I'd love if folks want to contribute in live to raise your hand and share from the conversations that you took part in. Yeah, Nicole.
Hi. Yeah, it's a lot easier for me just to say it, so I'll let you guys capture it. I think the biggest takeaway for me, I mean, there are so many challenges and barriers, and I don't know if they're bad practices. They're just, outdated, not informed. The one that stands out for me, and I think it could help solve a lot of the problems, I don't know how, I'm just going on into instinct here, is what was mentioned. I jumped to another session at some point because I had learned this main one was being recorded. So one of the things I picked up on was that in the the survivor, okay, who has left or separated, often goes back because it's just too much. There's too many points of contact. There's too many times they have to explain things. Even the service providers may not have the capacity to help as much as they could or want to. And then if they do have the capacity, sometimes they don't have the skill, right? Like navigating the financial marketplace is really challenging. And if you're coming from, say, a social service background, you may not have that financial acumen that is needed to really advocate. So again, I think it's just making sure, and what happens is they often go back because it's so overwhelming. So I think the solution, the key problem is once there is a separation, never mind prior to, but once there is a separation, what can we do to help support that individual from not going back and, back to essentially what could be despair?
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for kicking us off with the comments. It's always hard to be first, so appreciate it.
Thanks.
Gersharon, go ahead.
I think we need clearer definitions between what is the financial impacts and what are the economic impacts, because I think they both imply more short-term or longer-term outcome. And I think in order for us to be able to address those needs so that survivors are not needing to go back, I think we would be able more to transfer someone who is a survivor into becoming an independent consumer. And I think we have services available for that transition piece. But in settling as a consumer and an empowered consumer, I think that is a more expanded conversation. And I think we need to further define what are short-term and what are long-term outcomes. Where do we want the survivor to be? And I think that we talk about the transition from victim to survivor, but I think in the financial area, there is also that transition from survivor to consumer. And I think interacting with consumer products and as a consumer in the financial area, I think there's literacy points and experiences that most people who aren't dealing with violence, there's milestones for all of us as consumers. I think it's navigating and walking alongside or continuing to walk alongside a survivor until they are an empowered consumer.
Thanks, Gersharon. Great input and reflection. Would anybody else like to jump in? Please feel free to raise your hand, and then I can call on you if you'd like to add. Yeah, Nicole, go ahead.
Sorry, me again. But in response, I love, the idea of turning a survivor then into a consumer, but it also adds to be another comment or conversation we held in our breakout room was pre-separation, right? So one of the interventions that's happening, and again, I forget where, with SEA, Survivors of Economic Abuse, one of their key aspects to the comprehensive support module that they're working with, I don't have the name, but was 0% loans of they're offering, or they were going to look at offering through certain credit unions, I believe, 0% interest loans for survivors who have bad credit because of the economic abuse. And that is to help them separate. So, that's the beginning. And that's a particular service they're looking at, or that's in play right now. So I thought it would kind of jump onto the theme of, post-survival, during the experience of separating, and then pre-separation.
Thanks, Nicole. And actually that is a great, let's sort of segue into the second question. And you guys should have tons to say on this question, I think, because the breakout sessions were really solution oriented, which was wonderful to see. So thinking back on the sessions that you took part in, what are some of the current interventions you learned about? What's your biggest takeaway? What should we continue doing as a sector? Or maybe what changes are happening and that you're excited to see. So feel free to leave a credit or leave a comment in the chat, but also, again, would love to have folks pipe up and raise their hands. I see a comment in the chat from one of our participants. In the US, we need a freeze of economic and financial assets upon filing divorce, to then do a real-time assessment of that point and reconcile end of divorce settlement based on the initial point of divorce, not 2 to 5 years later. Thank you for sharing. Panel or our leaders, breakout session leaders, feel free to also jump in. Becky, thanks. To add to that, providing survivors with 0% interest rates without negatively impacting their credit rating would be beneficial. If folks want to think about so that gets into like big ideas and future visions. So also thinking through big ideas and future visions, feel free to jump in on that as well. Michaela.
Thank you, Molly. So I think I was in room 2 about like community responses, and I thought it was really interesting. Naomi mentioned also through SIA, so the work from the UK charity, they're exploring of different coordinated community responses. So to the barrier or challenges that Nicola mentioned regarding survivors, like maybe being too overwhelmed and with all of the different stakeholders that they have to navigate, and that they go back to abuse. So they're now exploring different models of coordinated community responses that really take more a survivor-centered approach, and brings together different stakeholders, so shelters, housing advisors, financial advisors, debt counselors, etc., to really make more of a community response. And I think that was really great and really interesting to see.
Thanks, Michaela. Anyone else from that who took part in that group want to share something that stood out, their biggest takeaway, or a wild idea or a sort of future vision from that conversation? Yeah, Nicole.
Are you tired of hearing from me yet? I always have, wild ideas. And coming as a public servant, coming from government, I find it's really hard to not jump to a possible solution, right? And so I'm going to take this platform as an opportunity to really dream big. And, listening to the breakout room and the comprehensive coordinated effort that the community can provide, I think it would be, a dream world, I'm sure, but in my mind, my dream would be someone who understands their situation as abuse. If it is that the case, then they have appointed contact who can walk them through the entire process. And exactly to what was said earlier, bringing them from a survivor to a consumer, right? So some like literal hand holding. I think that would be just, my wildest dream.
Thanks, Nicole. That fulsome, like that full suite of services and wraparound services, and understanding financial services is not just sort of a self-directed or one point of contact, but actually for many people is needing a sort of suite of wraparound services as well. And probably that applies to folks, not just survivors of economic abuse, but also to many other people as well.
Right. And it was brought up where the Economic Abuse Act 2021, I believe, is that in the UK we were in, has incorporated economic abuse as a form of domestic violence. So again, it's not just the financial services, it's all the things that someone needs when they're undergoing domestic violence.
Thanks, Becky. Thanks, Nicole. And thanks, Becky, for your comment in the chat. Others? Yeah, go ahead. Sherry?
Hi there. And we were talking about the CCR, and to me, that's the most crucial piece to all of this. And that was the conversation that we were having. I think that when we're considering that, we have to recognize that these are extremely complex issues from the time that abuse is happening. We talk about people going back. It's hard to get out. It's hard to get out from the get-go. We see people coming in at the moment they're thinking about it and trying to plan for it. And we have to be able to intervene at that stage because the abuse is happening at various levels. And if we have the opportunity to intervene with our collaborative partners, and that includes our financial services and legal services in some cases, having that opportunity to pull all of those people in, A, to stop further abuse happening in that area, but B, to be able to affect change so that they can actually leave that relationship successfully. Then you can start building onto the future. It's a very long trajectory. And in the sector for women's services, violence against women, intimate partner violence, whichever language you're sitting in, there are often service navigators, but they're touch points. You know, they might point them in the direction of, and it would be great to build on those models to build an advocacy role and be able to really be, you know, looking at some of the forms, the economic abuse evidence form that SEA has, you know, that concept to be able to advocate with the financial institutions. I'm thinking Nicole talking about these big dreams. You know, we advocate with the financial institutions, but there's limited opportunity to do anything because we don't have all the steps and pieces in place. So I think from that moment going forward, absolutely building that financial resilience and independence would be crucial, but we need to start it as early on as possible.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. And I think that points to, you know, something that is very true, but the issues of economic abuse, that it's a complex problem. It's not there's not one stakeholder who can sort of address all of the different aspects of economic abuse for survivors. It's a complex problem that requires a sort of systemic thinking and a systemic approach and a multi-stakeholder approach to solving it as well. Naomi, I saw your hand. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It was just really following on from Sherry's point. I think that everyone has a part to play, all have a role, and it's, I think, making the stakeholders who make decisions about funding and resource allocation, they need to have that insight to make those decisions. So part of our work within this kind of pilot project is influencing the people with the purse strings around how, well, if we acted earlier, it would save us this. There's the human costs and the financial costs, then to all the different services involved. So I think there's one element of that around making that case and building that survivor journey, and a survivor journey where actually, well, if she'd been, you know, received this information and referred into this and got this support at this point in the journey, then the results would be so different as opposed to if it went this way. And the other thing that we're kind of exploring as well that I wasn't able to touch upon in the session, because there was a really great kind of conversation, was around identifying potentially economic abuse champions within the coordinated community response. So across the different sectors and across the different professions, having, you know, somebody having received specialist training around economic abuse, and then being able to kind of develop that peer-to-peer learning within a local community, that they can share learning and trends within their own sector about what they're seeing. So that's it's about that kind of sharing and learning, that as you said, that it's not just within one sector.
Awesome. Thank you, Naomi. And I'll take one more comment. Johanna? Sorry, you should now.
Oh, is this better?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. I was just going to say that in the first breakout room, Starling, I think it was Charity, mentioned that there's a bit of difficulty for digital banks to support economic abuse survivors come forward, in expression of their experiences. just because there's no front-facing service providers and they don't have like a brick and mortar institution that people can walk into and you can kind of observe those signs. So I guess that I think that might be a challenge for the digital finance sector. And as that grows, we need to find ways of mitigating that. But other than that, I think that everyone else said what I had to say.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yohanan. Okay, we're going to head in to our last session. And I encourage, though, folks, if like more sort of insights or more reflections come to you as we head into the panel, and as you have a bit more time to think about it, please do share with everyone in the chat, because I'm sure everybody on the call would like to hear from you as well. But without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce our next set of panelists. And a reminder as well, as we head into this panel, please use the Q&A function throughout to share your questions. So we're joined today for our closing panel, which will be focused on Canada's progress on banking for survivors and best practices that are taking shape in the Canadian ecosystem, by Gilberto Sodolio, who's the Director of AML, Compliance, and the Financial Access Program at Scotiabank. Gilberto has a background in corporate finance, financial risk management, and social sustainability practices, and since 2019 has been leading the bank's Financial Access Program, which is a financial inclusion initiative that supports survivors of human trafficking and domestic abuse to gain access to banking services in Canada. He's also a member of our task force, so thank you so much to Gilberto for his work on the task force and for joining us today, and sits on the board of directors of VoiceFound, a frontline human trafficking support organization, and is also a member of Civic Action's Diversity Fellows Leadership Program for 2023-2024. We're also joined by Millie Acuna. Millie comes from a unique blend of industry and nonprofit experience in providing financial access to low-income Canadians throughout 15 years of employment with a local credit union in Winnipeg, prior to her current role as the manager of asset building programs at Seed Winnipeg. In her role at Seed, Millie coordinates the delivery of financial empowerment programs through over 100 community agencies by providing on-site service provider training and mentorship. Millie is passionate about serving unbanked and underbanked individuals, strengthening relationships within the community, and supporting financial empowerment for all to build a sustainable future. And last but not least, Maria Vranas, who is acting director for the Behavioral Finance Lab at the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. The FCAC's mandate is to supervise financial institutions' compliance with consumer protection legislation and to strengthen the financial literacy of Canadians. Maria leads an interdisciplinary division of researchers and designers in analyzing emerging issues in the consumer protection field and designing digital tools and behavioral interventions to strengthen the financial resilience and well-being of Canadians. So welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for joining. So I'm going to start off with I'll head into the questions that I have planned. I'll sort of do a question for each of you, and then I'm going to take some audience questions. So audience, please use the Q&A function. I'll make sure that we do have some time to get to them. So I'll maybe kick us off with a question for Millie. You have a really interesting perspective, having worked both within a credit union on issues of financial access, and then in the context of your role with Seed, managing the financial empowerment programming. I'd love to hear from you from that perspective. What are the main challenges you see women who are escaping situations of economic abuse face when it comes to accessing financial services, and particularly those that are financial services that are like adequate and appropriate for their needs?
I'll Hi, everyone. I'll start with my experience as an employee of a credit union for 15 years. It was eye-opening at the amount of sort of signals and stories I would get from our members regarding financial abuse. And it was unfortunately the lack of knowledge for me as a service provider or a trained branch service provider to respond. We were trained to do what policy states, what the regulatory rules would say. And so ultimately, sometimes it would just end the conversation. And so then about the 25 years ago, I didn't know who to turn to, and ultimately would reach out to the manager, the branch manager, or anyone else who would support. But afterwards, it would be the grassroots community organizations that I would reach out to and say, how do we help folks who are facing financial abuse? Fast forward to now, interesting how I went from financial service provider to now grassroots organization. The work that I do comes through either the community financial helpline. So there's anonymous callers that come through asking for support. The community partnerships that I manage and help embed financial empowerment work, whether that's providing a budgeting workshop or filing taxes or providing ID to access benefits and banking, or ultimately bringing these programs to First Nation communities, rural Manitoba, and hearing these stories, sort of the hallway conversations, finding someone that they can trust and say, you know what, you may be someone who can help me. How do I exit? How do I establish my credit again? Who do I turn to? All these different avenues have basically come through with every work that I've done through the credit union now here. And so what I'm seeing is ultimately is everything that we've heard so far today is unfortunately the exploitation, the weaponizing of credit products and banking services. It's the control of the abusive partner. And unfortunately, it is sort of almost the conflict with the victim or survivor about, is there hope for me? Do I do anything at this point? Does it make sense? Or do I just stay? And so the work that SEED does is ultimately meeting participants where they're at. So those unique situations where I'm on the call with a helpline caller, or they're disclosing this information while I'm filing their taxes, and they had no idea that the Canada Child Benefit could go directly into their own account, not their partner's account. Those are those conversations where I find are those moments where I can empower people, giving that awareness, sharing that knowledge so that they know, okay, what do I do next? Whether that's an exit strategy, whether that's trying to find ways to be independent and be self-sustaining, or just finding someone they could talk to and vent and just have that sort of moment to go, oh, I'm not alone. There are supports out there. So what I'm finding, though, back to the question about financial services is back to what I experience is, do I have that knowledge? Do I have the subject matter expertise and confidence to be able to talk to someone who comes through the branch doors? And that's what I'm seeing, unfortunately, here in my community, is that when we encourage folks to go speak to their financial institution, there is a gap. Policy, regulations. And so I become that extra voice for them and walk them through and say, let's figure this out together. And that's usually when you can see some of that twinkle in their eye going, okay, we can do this. Let's move on to the next stage. So there's training for sure, but I'm also inspired by one of the breakout sessions with Catherine in regarding the Australian movement, with banks having really specific groups and committees involved with the financial abuse victims and survivors. So I am excited to learn more about that and start the wave here in Winnipeg.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I love that you took some inspiration away from the breakout sessions. That was what they were intended for. So great to hear. And Maria, I'm going to go to you because Millie mentioned in her response, she identified in her time working at the credit unions, she talked about her struggles, and she mentioned, there's some policy change needed. And so I want to bring in that policy perspective here. So as I mentioned in introducing you, the mandate of FCAC is to protect consumers of financial products and services, to educate Canadians and strengthen their financial literacy, as well as to supervise compliance of federally regulated financial entities. Can you talk a bit about this mandate and how it relates particularly to survivors of economic abuse, and sort of what the FCAC's role, or how you see the responsibility within the context of that mandate is to survivors, and how the FCAC can help in addressing their needs.
Sounds great. And thank you, first of all, for inviting us to speak today. We do have a lot to share, and we've had the pleasure of actually working a lot with Millie. She's been a part of committees and has also participated with us in a number of initiatives and events. So it's always great to see a familiar face. So yes, so the agency does have a pretty big mandate for a small agency, but we're very passionate about what we do. And we really do look to protect all Canadians when you know, engaging with federally regulated financial institutions for financial products and services. But we do look to especially focus on vulnerable financial consumers. And we see that through evidence that we gather through our own data collection and research about areas of needs and focus. I do want to point out our definition of financial literacy, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So that includes knowledge, skills, and capacity to make informed financial decisions, as well as actions or behaviors that lead to positive financial outcomes. Some of you may be familiar with, in 2021, FCAC launched our second national strategy. This one is called Make Change That Counts. And it is from 2021 to 2026, where our focus is on motivating and mobilizing stakeholders in the financial ecosystem to work together towards a common goal of strengthening the financial resilience of Canadians. And why that's important is it's a shift away from our first strategy, which was focused on individuals and what they could do to strengthen their own financial literacy. We are now working with the ecosystem to address barriers to many Canadians, and that includes vulnerable populations, as well as catalyze change. And ultimately, what we want are better outcomes for financial consumers. So we also think of vulnerability as a state. While today we're focused on a very specific audience, anybody can find themselves in a vulnerable financial position due to changes in their own situations. And so we want to ensure that when we speak to vulnerabilities, we are also addressing those who are in a temporary state of vulnerability due to other reasons. But we do recognize through our research that there are certain populations that have endured greater hardships. And that is you know, due to a number of reasons, including the COVID pandemic, as well as the changing economic environment we live in, including the digitalization of financial products and services and how that impacts financial inclusion and accessibility. So the strategy is our framework for working with all Canadians, but targeting specific audiences that are experiencing greater barriers or hardships to reaching their improved financial resilience and overall financial well-being. So if we look at what we're trying to accomplish with the strategy, it's really to rally the ecosystem around our 6 overarching priorities, and then encourage all of us, including FCAC, as members of the ecosystem, to try to make changes and measure those changes so that we can see what's working and what's not working, and then scale them across the country. And that collaborative approach and collective approach allows us to make progress together and take advantage of that synergy versus individual initiatives on their own. So what does this mean from our perspective? FCAC is an ecosystem member, and we also have a role to play. And I'm going to touch on different aspects of it. As you mentioned, Molly, there is a role to play in terms of influencing policy. And we've really advanced that function within the agency. We have a programs and policy innovation team now that is very focused on working with other regulators, both at the federal level, but also provincially and territorially, to try to find ways to advance consumer protection. And that includes in real time, but also looking to the future and, you know, trying to determine how we need to continue to protect financial consumers as our environment is changing. So what can we do today to ensure that protection continues? You know, in light of things like digitalization, open banking, introduction of, you know, cryptocurrencies and things like that. So FCAC does this in a number of ways. We field a number of national surveys, and this lets us understand how Canadians are doing with managing their finances, what their barriers are, and what types of things are enabling them to be successful and financially resilient. We also run a series of targeted experiments and interventions, and we do this directly and also through collaboration with other ecosystem members. And this allows us to test things out, essentially, and see what's working and what's not working. So an example I can give is we've recently fielded an intervention where we're trying to target youth grades 6 to 12 with a focus on trying to address the gap between girls' financial confidence and boys' financial confidence, because our research showed that that gap does exist. And our preliminary results are actually quite encouraging. After doing our 2 financial literacy modules, self-reported confidence raised, as did overall self-reported knowledge by the girls' camp. So it does show us that we can narrow that gap, and seeing these types of results is encouraging because it's something that potentially we can apply broader and more nationally. I also want to point out that some of the research we field can help inform others. For instance, we've been running a monthly survey since August of 2020, where we're checking certain indicators of financial well-being with Canadians. And, you know, having longitudinal data over 2 years, and now actually 3 years now, allows us to see the trends and also try to influence policy development through evidence. This recently happened with mortgages, for instance. We saw a trend that more Canadians with homeowners with mortgages were having difficulty meeting their day-to-day expenses. And so we were able to share that evidence and then inform the development of a mortgage guideline. And that was distributed by our regulatory side to federally regulated financial institutions, encouraging them to work with their clients who are in severe financial duress to help them find solutions that would help them get through this period. So there is, you know, that is an example of how the process can work in a real life situation that's happening. It shows how we can pivot as well to address current situations and not, you know, sometimes things can take time to evolve, but this shows how we can move quickly to address a current situation. I would like to also just point out our international involvement. So we're working with the Department of Finance in coordinating Canada's role on the OECD Task Force on Financial Consumer Protection, as well as we are involved with other G20 countries and OECD members to endorse the updated high-level principles on financial consumer protection that were recently published. This is just an example of the work we do internationally to try to ensure that we are interacting with other entities like our colleagues from the UK and Australia here today, to learn from them as well as to share with them our insights and findings through our research and our own policy development. I'll leave it there because there's a lot to say, but I know others have other contributions to make as well. But thank you for this opportunity to share what the agency is doing to help advance consumer protection for this audience.
Thanks, Maria. And so one thing you mentioned there was around the research you're doing for young men and young women in schools, right? So, and you talked about how that could translate potentially for other kinds of interventions. And so, Gilberto, I want to turn to you because Scotiabank's been leading the way on the implementation of access to basic banking services through alternative ID. That was a sort of, I think the impetus behind that, and that's the financial access program that you run. And the impetus was a FCAC bulletin, but that was specifically pertained to folks who were escaping human trafficking. And so that's sort of another example of where an FCAC, the FCAC bulletin was focused on folks escaping human trafficking. Scotiabank has sort of expanded that beyond just those victims of human trafficking, and is looking at how the financial access program can be used for victims of domestic abuse or domestic economic abuse. So I'm wondering if you can talk a bit more about that program and about its relationship to victims of economic abuse.
Yeah, happy to, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to join this discussion today. So a little bit about the Financial Access Program. It is really a financial inclusion initiative that was originally designed to support survivors of human trafficking in Canada. And we do this by partnering with frontline organizations right across the country. So in some cases, it's helping their clients establish or reestablish access to the formal financial system. The program launched in 2019 as a pilot, where we really worked with those with lived experience to help design it. But we've since expanded to include survivors of domestic abuse, as you mentioned, which I've seen firsthand how they share very many similarities in the economic abuse that's experienced as a consequence of the exploitation. So the program definitely takes a survivor-centered, trauma-informed approach in each step of the process. We offer customized banking products, financial literacy through a financial wellness guide that we prepare, which provides some fundamentals of banking, but also an overview of the products that we're opening. It's not just a matter of showing someone a tool, but or giving someone a tool, but showing them how to use it and what features and functionality comes included in that. And this is all delivered through specially trained financial advisors, leveraging our branch network within the vicinity of where those organizations are located. And the training really covers awareness of human trafficking, but also some of the sensitivities surrounding the trauma. So that's the program in a nutshell. What it's really meant to do, though, is remove those systemic barriers to financial inclusion. And sort of the three key ones are really trust, costs, and hopefully regulatory in the cases where we are working with survivors who lack appropriate ID. So I sort of mentioned sort of trust and cost, and maybe to dig into that a little bit, the trust factor, hopefully we can build that up really by matching a survivor who's now a customer with a financial advisor right from the get-go. So it's a very hands-on, personalized experience that happens right from day one. And hopefully that building of that rapport adds another trusted resource in their support network. Costs is really, managed through the products that we offer, and we're able to contain those for survivors. And then finally, on the regulatory side, as you mentioned, there was guidance released earlier this year by the FCAC and FINTRAC, another regulator here in Canada, that basically promotes a new approach on how to support those looking for banking who lack appropriate ID. And so the way we operationalize that at Scotiabank is that we're able to actually recognize the frontline organizations that we partner with, so our referral partners, as a reliable source for name and date of birth information. So with that small but significant recognition, it's able to be a huge sort of win-win for both the agency and the survivor. So the agency has this extra ability to now act as a referral source and reliable referral source for a survivor in their care. And the survivor, of course, is able to open a basic bank account without appropriate government ID, essentially, which hopefully will come in a bit later on. And I think you mentioned, what is the impetus here for this? I mean, for Scotiabank, the impetus has been and continues to be our commitment to human rights, empowering our customers, and advancing economic resilience, especially in the communities, in which we operate. It's also a way to combat human trafficking and domestic abuse. And the hope is through financial remedy, we can actually help mitigate re-exploitation risk, right? And I think we've heard some of this come up in the breakout sessions, but really the longer an individual goes without access to banking, regardless of what the underlying consequence is of pushing them into that situation. But so the longer they go without formal financial access, the greater the likelihood that there are to use the informal economy or underground economy. And that in itself increases vulnerabilities, which could potentially increase re-exploitation risk. There's a really interesting fact that I've learned just through this work, that the average number of attempts it takes someone to exit an abusive relationship, whether that's human trafficking or domestic violence, is 7. And so the hope is that with a small but significant asset like a bank account, we can increase not only resiliency, financial wellness, but also personal autonomy. And again, as mentioned in our breakout session earlier, dignity. So that's really the motivation behind this.
Thank you. And as well, I want to invite our panelists, if one of the other panelists says something you really want to jump in and add to that, feel free. Otherwise, I'm going to follow up. I have a question from the audience for Gilberto. What were the challenges you faced from your risk and fraud partners in setting this scheme up for basic bank accounts?
That's a great question. I mean, I think the risks are present, especially when you're having discussions around know your customer, KYC, and identification. I mean, certainly the bank doesn't want to open up a potential fraud channel, but I think that's really where the relationship, which is really the basis of any banking relationship, but the relationship with our referral partners is really key to creating more successful outcomes, right? And so it really starts with that. And of course, there is a bit of a screening and or assessment process that takes place both on the part of the agency that we work with, but also internally, again, to ensure that we're creating outcomes. And I was happy to say those were the pretty quick conversations with the internal risk teams around that.
Wonderful. And I'm actually wondering if you could, sorry to stick with you, and then I do see another question in the chat for Maria, so I'll get to that next. But you talked about those internal partners that you had to work with, but a big part of this was building relationships with community and frontline service organizations. And Millie kind of talked about some of the challenges. She's been on both sides of that fence. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about that process of establishing those relationships, and if there was an extent to which those organizations also help to inform the design and implementation of the program that the bank ultimately rolled out.
Yes. So we typically look to partner with well-established frontline organizations. So typically these are registered charities that have a long-standing record of community impact. They typically work with survivors in a primary care or secondary care capacity, right? Even though I would say probably that the primary care is always the focus. And so these partners are able to really identify and assess suitable candidates for the program, right? And so again, that's sort of like the first screening process that really, a practice that leads to better outcomes. And absolutely, I mean, I would say, I've had the honor of learning so much from leaders in our communities, especially those with lived experience. And we've had the privilege of obtaining direct feedback from, the first few onboardings that we did with new customers. Part of our program is that we encourage is actually for the survivor to be accompanied to the branch for their first appointment with their caseworker or advocate. And that's also been great from a customer experience perspective, because we're able to then get feedback not only from the customer, but also from their advocate to see how did the experience unfold? How did that go for you? And so one of the things that we've done in the program is we've actually created an intake form where we capture certain information about the customer. Typically, what we look to capture is if they've had any previous banking experience and what their level of financial literacy or financial competency is. So it's a bit backward looking, but it's also forward looking because we also ask them about their responsibilities and what their goals might be going forward. And so this form, this intake form, is actually given to the financial advisor who will be helping to open their account in advance of meeting them for the first time. So what the financial advisor then is able to do is glean this information and really tailor that first meeting accordingly. So they're able to sort of, as Millie said, to meet them where they're at in terms of their level of competency and understanding. And it's also a way to immediately build rapport, right? Because it's more of like you're checking into a hotel, like a concierge type of experience. We're expecting you. So it really reduces all of those awkward conversations around personal finances that, you know, anyone might feel awkward or embarrassed to speak about, and especially if you're coming from a vulnerable position, you're sitting in a professional setting. So it helps, bring increased comfort levels, and again, increase that rapport, which is crucial to building trust. So yeah, it was a great, a great win for us, and something that I think really helps to set our program apart.
And Millie, maybe I'll actually sort of come back to you, because I think obviously you might have some thoughts to add on what everything Gilberto's shared, and I think as well maybe an interesting perspective from your work with Seed of if there's others from financial institutions in the audience who want to partner with community organizations, how should they, what are some sort of best practices from your perspective about approaching those kinds of relationships and partnerships and ensuring that they're really effective?
What I love to hear from Gilberto is the fact that they do have that intake process where they encourage their support worker to attend the meeting. I find that there's so many emotions involved with the shame or the fear of coming out and talking to someone. It is so important to make that a comfortable experience. So I'm happy to hear that is the strategy that Scotiabank is doing. And so I would say the same here in Winnipeg. We have very similar partnership with the Assiniboine Credit Union, where we're working with access to banking with alternative ways of ID. So that is happening with community organizations here. But how this is working effectively is we have what's called MUFFIN. It's a cute acronym. It's the Manitoba Financial Empowerment Network. Multi-level agencies are a part of this program or this committee, where we have financial institutions, university, college, different levels of government, healthcare, all around the same table, identifying what pieces we're all responsible for, and then being really present when topics like financial abuse. And so how do we work together to make sure this is as beneficial as possible for the participant? So very participant-centered work through the Manitoba Financial Empowerment Network. You won't forget it now that I said MUFFIN. So remember MUFFIN. And I think it's really unique to hear that this is a group in Canada that is working together collaboratively to make sure that all these different systems are talking to one another to make sure that we are addressing the same. In terms of, and I'm looking at the website now, I had to take a look, Gilberto, but I'm curious why there isn't a Winnipeg location on the site. Just feedback for you. But the partnership work is probably the number one piece of how we can be most effective when supporting folks who are facing abuse or are surviving. I am not a counselor. I am one that will file your taxes. I'll help you advocate. I'll do your ID work, and I'll help you with financial literacy. But as we all know, there's so much more that is required when someone is facing domestic abuse. And so the community of practice, having those wraparound supports is 100% required for this. And a story that I'd like to quickly share is that I did a budgeting workshop, let's say, at a second stage housing. And all the women in that group was like, I need to know how to open a bank account or establish credit, when I was invited to do budgeting. So quickly had to pivot. But because of that relationship with the second stage housing, I was able to establish relationships with counselors. I was able to establish relationships with elders, knowledge keepers in the Indigenous communities, looking towards food insecurity and what supports are out there, looking at housing sort of subsidy programs so that we can try and help them get their basic needs, and then work towards where they're at in terms of, okay, let's start with your income taxes and find some income boosting supports, and then have you establish your new bank account. So if you could see, there's all those little pieces that come together when you're helping someone, where it was only took that sort of 1 minute to sort of establish that relationship, but being present with a toolkit or like a tool sort of resource box, that is essential. Like that would be the piece that I would really encourage everyone as a community of practice, or join Muffin. There you go.
Great acronym. Maria, so in addition to that community practice, right? Another piece that is essential really for designing effective interventions is data. And so Maria, you talked about the FCAC's measurement plan. And so that's a part of it. And we had a question from the audience around, do you have segregated data regarding financial well-being for different groups, so such as new immigrants, single mothers in Canada?
So really happy to get that question. It's like I planted it, so thank you. So FCAC does field a number of surveys and data, and we also do our own analysis and report. And last fall, we actually published a report called Consumer Vulnerability: Evidence from the Monthly COVID-19 Financial Wellbeing Survey. And it's in that report where we identified, while everybody can experience financial hardship, there are certain audiences that were affected greater, and those included low-income, Indigenous peoples, recent immigrants, and women. So we do have that data by those target audiences, and I have an extra early Christmas gift. We are happy to share that data. So if people would like to do their own analysis, we do have an opportunity to request our data sets for our surveys that we run. And we encourage, in fact, stakeholders, academics, researchers, both domestically and internationally, to use our data to do their own analyses. Because again, it comes back to this collaborative approach that we have to take as an ecosystem. And when others can access the data and do their own analyses, they bring more insight and perspective to the table, and it's all evidence-based. So that is what is great about fielding these studies and making the data available, is the opportunity to expand its impact and ultimately achieve those better outcomes. And even the example we're speaking to is a great demonstration of how the ecosystem can work together to address a barrier. As regulators, we did put out an updated bulletin to clarify our position about access to basic banking and what appropriate identifications could be used. But then we see, organizations like Gilberto's taking that and really running with it and offering a service, essentially beyond what the focus was of our bulletin. And we know a lot of those barriers are raised by organizations like Millie's Seed Winnipeg, but Millie mentioned Muffin. There are 18 financial literacy networks across Canada that take a very similar approach, where they bring a variety of ecosystem organizations to the table to discuss those barriers and challenges, and how to go about making change within their own areas, but also beyond that. So I see my colleague Dave Hayes has shared the data request form. So if anybody is interested in requesting access to FCAC data, you can just follow that form. So I guess it's just, I want to point out how working together as an ecosystem, we can actually make change that counts and make those advancements together as a group, probably more successfully than as individual entities. So I thought it was a great segue back to the national strategy and addressing those barriers for Canadians.
Thank you. And so we're heading into the last 10 minutes. So I want to remind folks and really open it up for questions from the audience. Please use the Q&A function or just drop them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll just continue asking my own questions. But I'm sure, you know, you're online for because you have burning questions. So I want to make sure we do get to those. So drop them in the chat. One comment we did get, I saw in the chat, was around the attention that elder abuse rather has gotten in the ecosystem. So, you know, the government of Canada's awareness raising, banks have invested in training their staff to recognize some of the signs of elder abuse in particular. And then research conducted by CCFWE indicates that training is working, that it is making a difference. So I'm wondering, Maria, whoever wants to jump in on this question, what do you think is preventing banks from doing the same for economic abuse? I'm sort of building a little bit on the comment that was put in the chat. And what lessons do you think we can learn from the work that's been done and the success we've seen? Yeah, Maria, go ahead.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so I think that I go back to my earlier comments about providing guidance to those that we regulate to help them navigate, you know, the regulatory environment, but also give them opportunities to determine how to make changes within their own entities to advance that. So I think it's working together to provide examples and clarification around interpretations of legislation, because that's often tricky as well to navigate. Millie spoke earlier to, you know, trying to navigate it when she did work for a credit union and trying to understand, you know, she was following all the, you know, the regulations and the rules and the guidance, but how do we move beyond that? And I think that is the opportunity I was speaking to earlier about having to work together as parts of the ecosystem to advance that. You know, I think that when we put out things like the Financial Consumer Protection Framework, which is something that we announced last June, that is also an opportunity for us to provide that guidance to federally regulated entities around addressing issues that are raised again through evidence. So we've done a number of industry reviews, and that raised to us some issues. For instance, access to appropriate products was raised during one of our industry reviews. So we've put out guidelines to help regulated entities understand how to best approach those conversations with their clients. And that includes, you know, understanding their clients' needs and doing assessments of, you know, their risk tolerance and what they're actually looking to achieve with a product versus just offering them, you know, a wide berth of products. Because we know right now the choice is exponential. You know, there are more products being put out every day, especially with the introduction of open banking and fintech, and it is dizzying. Like, our brain can only compute so much, as Supriya Syal likes to say. Our brains can only access so much information and compute it. So while choice is wonderful and option is wonderful, sometimes it actually puts us in a bit of a freeze mode. So I think that there is an opportunity for the financial industry to connect, as Gilberto said, and make it a personal experience and make sure they understand what the needs of the clients are and put forth appropriate products for those needs. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. And so maybe I'll wrap it up with a last question for everyone. And you can sort of choose, I think. So thinking of all the conversations we've had today in the breakout rooms and through your work, what's one thing that you think should move forward today? We leave this room and we action it around that would help support Canadian financial institutions and the financial services sector and all of the sort of stakeholders that fall within that in taking up the mantle of pushing for greater financial inclusion of economic abuse survivors, whether that's creating more programs like the Financial Access Program at Scotiabank, or expanding access to those programs to survivors of economic abuse. What's sort of like that one action item that you really want everyone to leave this room and say, gung ho, we're moving forward with that, or we're taking action on that, or learning more about it, even if it just starts there. And I can give you a minute if you want to.
I'll jump in because I'm really fired up from the breakout room that Catherine did. It was the Design to Disrupt breakout room. And so really hearing the Australian banks and their movement regarding reimagining banking products and the language in policy, that to me is something that I like to take back to the Muffin Group and decide to create a working committee or group to really focus on that with the financial institutions around the table. So I'm really excited to share this. I have the I think it was shared in the link or the chat, the presentation that Catherine delivered. So that's my super takeaway from today.
And maybe for those who didn't get to join that breakout session, do you want to give a very quick, what about that framework really it got you so fired up and you want to carry forward?
Yeah, it speaks to my experience in the credit union system, where I wasn't sure how to have those conversations and what resources we could have and what actually concrete sort of steps we could do with financial products. So in that breakout session, it was nice to hear that they were looking at very, really interesting ways to change either credit access or even talking about different ways of opening accounts. If I'm looking at different communication or using AI or data gathering to send flags to financial institutions, and so putting in some security measures in place to stop it when those flags show up. I mean, I'm not very tech savvy, so I can't really explain that part of it all, but it sounds to me that they're moving in a direction where it's on top of mind, right? So it's there. And ultimately, sometimes when I think of policy, I think it's protection of institutions, it's protection of the individual, but may not make sense for the person who's experiencing financial abuse. So I like that they're thinking outside the box. And so that's sort of the strategies that I've always been thinking about being part of the workforce or the task force is we have all these wonderful ideas about the bank should do this, this, and this, but knowing that in Australia, these things are actually implemented and happening, that would help sort of start the work here in Manitoba. So that's what got me fired up. There's proof.
Yeah. That's great. And actually we should connect after, because I know someone who's building a solution. I think that might be really interesting around that red flags piece. So I can share some info about it. Maybe Gilberto, I'm gonna put you in the hot seat.
Happy to jump in. So I don't know if there's one takeaway specifically. I think it depends on which way you're looking at it, right? If you're looking at it, and unfortunately I missed the disruption session, but from a preventative lens versus a remedial lens, right? And so certainly the work in financial access is more of providing remedy to help mitigate re-exploitation. But in order to do that, you really need to listen, and I think that's where awareness and having those conversations and keeping that dialogue alive and at a high level, the more institutions can hear what the issue is, that's where they can really help to connect the dots and understand what resources can be leveraged to help make an impact. And as we've heard kind of throughout the forum today, it really takes a multi-stakeholder approach to do this, right? There's no white knight that's riding in to save the day. It's a really multi-stakeholder collaborative approach to a systemic crisis that I think is the best way forward.
Thank you. And Maria, I'll give you the last word.
So what I really loved about what Millie said was this looking to others. And I think it goes back to our whole idea around experimenting. We need to try things and we need to see what works and what doesn't work. And then for those things that work, we need to figure out how to scale them. And that just doesn't happen only in Canada. We have to look to our international partners to see what's working in their jurisdictions and how that could apply here in Canada. We've learned a lot from both the UK and Australia around consumer protection measures and what has worked in their environments. And we've applied and tested some of those things out in Canada. So I think encouraging everybody to continue to experiment and to use evidence in the design and implementation of their programs and services. That's what we would love to see more of that. And we want to continue doing that ourselves and sharing our results so people can learn from what we're finding through our experiments and apply that evidence in their world. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I'd like to add, that's a great note, I think, to end on, because it sort of captures some of the reason behind this whole summit, right? Like we can't do it alone. We have to look to others who are, there's no point reinventing the wheel. If there's others who are doing things that are working, why not look to them and learn what we can from them? And so that's really, part of the goal of today's summit. So thank you all for being part of that conversation. And thank you also to all of our participants for joining. So on that note, we'll say bye to our panelists, and we'll welcome back on our Director of Policy, Michaela Meyer, to just say some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Molly. Thank you so much for this really amazing panel now in the end. I think, like Molly, like you said, I think Maria's words really captured well the aim of our conference, and basically summing up also my final closing remarks. On behalf of CCFWE, I really want to thank all of you for attending today and also enriching our conversations with your insights. I think one takeaway I had, even after 3 years post-pandemic and with some tech dry runs, you can still have tech issues with online platforms. So we will take that into account, and thanks again for your patience if some of the things came up. As the Financial Future Summit comes to a close, I want to also briefly reflect on the insightful discussions that we just had. All of us coming together from various backgrounds and 3 continents with one common goal of making financial services more inclusive to victim survivors. And the global perspective just shows the universal nature of economic abuse, which is also reiterated by research findings from the UK, Canada, and Australia that suggest around 95% of domestic abuse survivors also experience economic abuse. So it's such a common form of domestic violence, yet often overlooked and impacting survivors for years post-separation. In the beginning, we heard from advocacy organizations that all fight to end economic abuse and to remove structural barriers that economic abuse survivors are facing, keeping them from economic empowerment. So they all found unique approaches to drive change within the financial sector. And then in the breakout sessions, we took a deep dive into some of the tactics and measures that financial institutions developed to provide more equitable financial services to survivors, and learned about their successes and also return on investment when following such strategies. I think, I think I'm going to shout it again also to Catherine for seeming to have fired up a lot of us on the practices in Australia. And then we finally now close the discussions with a panel that share different perspectives on the financial inclusion of economic abuse survivors, and highlighting some macro and system level trends from the policy, banking, and frontline point of view. And I think it kind of speaks to also, I think, what we've heard a lot now during the conversations, the importance of different multi-stakeholder approaches, a lot of the importance of wraparound services to really have more of a community response that is survivor-centered. I think all of us attending here today already gained new insights on the global challenges that still remain, about also, again, ways organizations are addressing it, and also some best practice examples from banks and also regulators that are already in place. To kind of maybe continue the knowledge sharing experience, I think would be great to share some also insights in the chat, but also You can follow us on social media, so with the hashtag Financial Future Summit and also hashtag CCFWE. I think it would be great to continue again like this knowledge sharing experiences with our network. On this note, I also want to thank our amazing volunteer, Joanna Demeke, who has been tweeting live updates on our lively conversations throughout the summit. So thanks a lot for all of your work and the dedication. Thanks as well to Molly, our financial task force coordinator, to be such a real force in organizing this event and doing such an amazing job leading us through the summit, even when encountering some technical difficulties on the way. Thank you for your leadership, dedication, and expertise. We're really grateful to have you as part of our team at CCFWE. And thank you also to Messi for all of your leadership and guidance, your vision, and your incredible determination to drive change for economic abuse survivors across Canada and beyond. Thanks to our board members and the rest of the CCFWE team, Narita, Patrick, Natalie, Nia, Andrea, for supporting us in making this event a reality. I also want to express immense gratitude to our Wage, our funder, for their continued support, and as well our task force members who are committed to supporting survivors of economic abuse within their sectors and providing us with their incredible knowledge and guidance. And finally, also a big thank you to all of our distinguished speakers for taking the time and share your expertise with us. Nicola, you're always inspiring our work. Rebecca, same, as we heard in Australia. There is so much already we can learn from you. And Naomi, Catherine, Lauren, and Maria for providing insights in how the financial sector can be a strong partner in fighting economic abuse. And finally, also Gilberto and Nili, who are part of our task force members and are really at the forefront in changing the lives of survivors in Canada. So in the end, also thank you again to our amazing graphic designer, Laura Hannock, who captured our lively conversations in the great graphic recordings. We will share them together with our summit report in the coming weeks. So before we close the event, I just want to remind people again to please also sign and share our petition. It's one of the actions we can take today that only take 30 seconds to really raise awareness about economic abuse and by officially making November 26th National Economic Abuse Awareness Day. So with that, I say thanks to again everyone for joining, for coming together, and for being part of this global event. Thank you so much. Molly, do you want to have any last words before we close the event?
No, thank you everyone for attending and taking part in today's conversations. Take care.